The man killed outside a Burlington restaurant earlier this week was a longtime member of the Hells Angels. Halton police identified him as 55-year-old Craig McKillum of Oakville, who also went by the name Craig Brown. McKillum was among 30 people charged in an illegal gambling and money laundering investigation 2 years ago, a case in which charges weren't proven in court. The fatal shooting happened Tuesday night around 8:30 in the parking lot of a Mandarin restaurant on Fairview Street near Brant Street in Burlington. Halton police are still looking for the shooter or shooters. They're asking anyone with dash cam footage in the area between 4 and 10 p.m. on Tuesday to contact them. They're also trying to identify this gray Honda Civic they believe was involved in the shooting.
A quiet Tuesday dinner turned deadly when Hells Angel Craig Truck McIlcoham was gunned down outside a Mandarin restaurant. The former bodyguard to Canada's most powerful biker boss was shot once in the chest while his family waited inside. Police are hunting a mysterious grey Honda Civic, but insiders whisper his murder wasn't random. Was it revenge, a power struggle, or did his secret double life finally catch up with him? The double life that ended in tragedy.
The president of a bike chapter in the Bronx, he was coming out of a gas station and he got straight up like assassinated.
So I know him, and my big brother is a pagan. That dude was a pagan and he was a blood. And they knew that that was about to get real, because now he was gonna put the Bloods on bikes, and that would have been checkmate, you know?
So who hit it?
That was the support club.
So the Hells Angels
Support Club
hit the pagan president.
Yeah.
Craig McIlcoham wasn't just your average suburban dad from Oakville. On weekdays, he was Craig Brown, the guy who drove his kids to school, maintained a perfect lawn, and blended seamlessly into neighborhood life. He was the guy who'd wave hello at the local coffee shop, attend parent-teacher meetings, and never raise eyebrows. His neighbors described him as quiet, friendly, and completely unremarkable. Exactly how he wanted to be seen. But behind this carefully constructed facade lived a completely different man. Craig was a patched member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club, not some weekend warrior who played dress-up, but a full-fledged insider with deep connections throughout Ontario's criminal networks. Friends say he'd been with the club for over a decade, rising through the ranks during a period when the Angels were consolidating power across southern Ontario. Unlike some of his flashier brothers, who wore their colors proudly and courted attention, Craig operated like a ghost. He kept his worlds completely separate, family in Oakville, club business elsewhere. This separation wasn't just preference, it was survival. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, the ability to move between different spheres without drawing attention is invaluable. Craig McIlcoham's story is a haunting illustration of the precarious balance required to maintain a double life, and the devastating consequences when that balance fails. By day, he was Craig Brown, the suburban family man who blended seamlessly into Oakville's middle-class landscape. He drove his children to school, maintained his lawn, and participated in the ordinary rhythms of neighborhood life. This carefully constructed facade concealed his true identity as a patched member of the Hells Angels, with deep ties to Ontario's criminal networks. Living between these two worlds required extraordinary compartmentalization. As one associate noted, Craig didn't take unnecessary risks, he kept his worlds separate. This discipline allowed him to navigate the dangerous currents of organized crime while maintaining the appearance of suburban normalcy. For years, this duality worked. His neighbors had no idea about his criminal connections, while his associates respected his ability to operate under the radar. The psychological toll of such compartmentalization can be immense. Constantly switching between identities creates a fracturing of the self. You become neither fully one person nor the other. Trust becomes transactional rather than authentic. Relationships in both worlds remain inherently incomplete because neither side knows the whole person. When Project Hobart swept Craig up in 2019, the first major cracks appeared in his carefully constructed life. Suddenly, his criminal associations were public knowledge, and his legal troubles threatened to collapse both of his worlds simultaneously. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the damage was done. Everyone now knew who Craig really was. What makes Craig's story particularly tragic is the fatalism that seemed to overtake him in his final months. Despite credible threats against his life, He maintained his routines and took no additional security precautions. This behavior suggests either a profound denial of his vulnerability or, perhaps more likely, a resignation to his fate. After decades of living divided, perhaps Craig understood that such existences rarely end peacefully. His murder in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot represents the violent collision of his two worlds, a public execution in a suburban setting. The professional nature of the hit, the clean getaway, and the wall of silence that followed all speak to the deadly seriousness of the criminal world he inhabited. In the end, Craig's story serves as a stark reminder that double lives are ultimately unsustainable. The center cannot hold indefinitely, and when it collapses, the consequences can be fatal. His suburban neighbors lost Craig Brown, the family man they thought they knew. His criminal associates lost Craig McKilquam, the reliable Hell's Angel, and his family lost both, along with any hope of ever truly understanding the man who moved between these worlds. He wasn't the guy with the loud bike and leather vest at the school pickup. One source familiar with Craig explained, he was calculated about everything: how he dressed, who he spoke to, where he went. Nothing was accidental. This carefully balanced double life came crashing down on April 29, 2025, when a single gunshot in a Burlington restaurant parking lot exposed everything Craig had worked to keep hidden. As police descended on the Mandarin restaurant and news crews captured footage of his body being removed, the carefully constructed walls between his two lives collapsed completely. This double life wasn't just Craig's personal choice, it reflected the changing nature of organized crime in Canada. The old stereotype of bikers as loud, brash troublemakers has evolved into something much more sophisticated. Today's criminal organizations need members who can operate in both worlds, and Craig mastered this balancing act until someone decided his time was up. A professional hit that left police baffled. The killing itself was a masterclass in professional execution. On that Tuesday evening in April, diners at the popular Mandarin buffet heard what many described as a single pop, like a firecracker. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Craig McKilquam was already lying beside his black SUV with a single bullet hole in his chest. An off-duty nurse attempted CPR, but it was clear to first responders that death had been instantaneous. What struck investigators immediately was the clinical precision of the hit. One shot, perfectly placed, no missed attempts, no spray of bullets, no collateral damage. Just a single fatal wound delivered with surgical accuracy. The killer hadn't left behind shell casings, suggesting the use of a revolver specifically chosen because it doesn't eject spent casings. The murder weapon has never been recovered. Even more impressive was the killer's escape. Despite the restaurant's busy parking lot and dozens of potential witnesses, nobody saw the shooter flee. One moment someone was approaching Craig's vehicle, and the next they had vanished completely. 3 separate diners noticed a figure in dark clothing with a hood pulled up approaching Craig's SUV between 8:10 and 8:19 p.m., but descriptions remained frustratingly vague. This wasn't some amateur hour, explained a veteran Halton Regional Police detective who spoke on condition of anonymity. The shooter knew exactly where the security cameras couldn't see. They knew exactly where their target would be. They knew exactly how to disappear afterward. This level of planning suggests someone with resources, patience, and connections. The execution of Craig McKilquam in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot stands as a textbook example of a professional hit. Methodical, efficient, and frustratingly difficult to solve. The single gunshot that took his life on that April evening was just the final act in what investigators believe was a meticulously orchestrated elimination. What continues to baffle Halton Regional Police is the clinical precision with which the hit was carried out. The shooter chose a location with known surveillance blind spots, suggesting intimate familiarity with the restaurant's security setup. Craig's vehicle was parked in an area that offered both easy access for the killer and minimal risk of being recorded, a detail too convenient to be coincidental. The timing itself speaks to professional calculation. The shooter struck during the dinner rush when the restaurant was busy enough that a single firecracker sound wouldn't immediately trigger panic, but witnesses would be distracted with their meals. The 8:21 p.m. timing meant darkness had fallen, further obscuring visual identification while still ensuring enough ambient activity to provide cover for the killer's escape. Most tellingly, the murder weapon appears to have been a revolver, a choice that investigators recognize as deliberately forensic conscious. Unlike semi-automatic pistols that eject shell casings, revolvers retain their spent cartridges, leaving police without these crucial pieces of ballistic evidence. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was executed by someone who understood how to minimize forensic traces. The phantom gray Honda Civic, reported by multiple witnesses, has become the investigation's most maddening dead end. Despite public appeals for information and extensive review of traffic cameras in the surrounding areas, the vehicle effectively vanished. Investigators suspect the car likely had stolen or swapped plates, another hallmark of professional planning. What truly distinguishes this case from typical homicides is the complete wall of silence that descended immediately afterward. Not a single member of McKilquam's criminal circle has provided usable information. This organized silence is something police rarely encounter outside of sophisticated criminal organizations, where the consequences for cooperation with authorities are severe and widely understood. Detective Sarah Patel, who led the initial investigation, noted off the record that the case bears all the hallmarks of what organized crime experts call a sanctioned hit, an elimination approved at high levels within criminal hierarchies and carried out by specialists. These aren't impulsive acts of violence, but calculated removals of individuals deemed problematic. The aftermath has been equally professional. No boasting, no loose talk, no apparent power struggles to fill Craig's position. This suggests his elimination wasn't just accepted, but expected within his criminal circles. The investigation remains active, but has stalled without fresh leads or witness cooperation. For Halton Regional Police, the McKilquam case represents a sobering reminder of the limitations of modern investigative techniques when confronted with the discipline and resources of organized crime. Without someone breaking ranks, the professional hit that ended Craig McKilquam's double life may remain the perfect crime, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and perpetually unsolved. The only substantial lead emerged when multiple witnesses mentioned seeing a grey Honda Civic with dark-tinted windows and black alloy rims in the area before and after the shooting. Despite this information being released to the public and extensive review of surveillance footage from neighboring businesses, the vehicle was never definitively identified. The professional nature of the hit sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and law enforcement circles. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killing or a sloppy revenge shooting. It was calculated, cold-blooded murder carried out with the kind of efficiency that suggests serious organization. The question wasn't just who pulled the trigger, but who had the resources and connections to order such a professional hit. Project Hobart, the case that put him in the crosshairs. To understand why Craig McKilquam ended up dead in a parking lot, you need to understand what happened 3 years earlier. In 2019, Craig found himself swept up in a massive police investigation codenamed Project Hobart. This wasn't just another drug bust, it was a sophisticated operation targeting illegal gambling and money laundering across Ontario. The numbers were staggering: 30 individuals charged, millions in assets seized, and a criminal network that reached into legitimate businesses, sports betting operations, and offshore banking. Craig wasn't some bit player caught in the net. Investigators placed him near the center of operations. Facing serious charges that included possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most significantly, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. That last charge was the killer. Designed specifically to dismantle organized crime, it carried potential decades in prison. For 3 years, Craig lived under the shadow of these charges. His movements monitored, his associates scrutinized, his future uncertain. The case dominated headlines and put enormous pressure on everyone involved in the organization. Then in 2022, something unexpected happened. All charges against Craig were dropped due to trial delays. Canada's Supreme Court had established that criminal proceedings exceeding 30 months violate constitutional rights to timely justice. Project Hobart's complexity meant the estimated trial duration was 41 months, well beyond the legal limit. Craig walked free on a technicality, but freedom came with a price. Everyone now knew he'd been targeted by police, identified as a key player in organized crime, and positioned to potentially testify against former associates. In the criminal world, being labeled a potential informant can be a death sentence, even if you never actually cooperated. Project Hobart stands as one of the most ambitious organized crime investigations in Ontario's recent history. Launched in 2019, this sprawling police operation targeted illegal gambling and money laundering operations across the province, eventually ensnaring Craig McIlquham along with 29 other individuals. While the investigation ultimately failed to secure convictions against McIlquham due to trial delays, it fundamentally altered his standing in the criminal world and likely set in motion the events that would lead to his execution. The scope of Project Hobart was breathtaking. Millions in assets seized, dozens charged, and a complex criminal network exposed. Police spent years building the case, using wiretaps, surveillance, financial forensics, and confidential informants to map out an elaborate system where illegal gambling proceeds were laundered through legitimate businesses across southern Ontario. For McIlquham, the charges were potentially devastating: possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most seriously, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. This last charge carried decades of potential prison time and was designed specifically to dismantle organized crime networks. Investigators hadn't positioned McIlquham as a peripheral figure. They placed him near the operational center of the criminal enterprise. The 3 years McIlquham lived under these charges fundamentally changed his life. His movements were monitored, his communications scrutinized, and his associations carefully tracked. More damaging still was the perception within his criminal circles. In the outlaw biker world, being charged doesn't necessarily damage your standing, but being positioned to potentially inform on others does. The longer the case dragged on, the more pressure McIlquham faced, and the more suspicious his associates became. When all charges against McIlquham were dropped in 2022 due to trial delays exceeding Canada's 30-month limit, it should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it may have sealed his fate. Everyone now knew he'd been identified by police as a key player in organized crime. More critically, his former associates had to consider an uncomfortable possibility. What if McIlquham had considered cooperation during those 3 uncertain years? Criminal organizations operate on absolute trust and the elimination of risk. Even the possibility that McIlquham might have been tempted to cooperate, or might do so if charged again in the future, could have been enough to mark him for elimination. In this world, potential informants aren't given the benefit of the doubt. The timing is particularly telling. McIlquham was killed 3 years after his charges were dropped, long enough for suspicions to harden, for tensions to build, and for careful planning to take place. Criminal organizations often bide their time, waiting for memories to fade and for targets to lower their guard. The ultimate irony of Project Hobart is that it failed in its primary objective of securing convictions against figures like McIlquham, but may have inadvertently succeeded in marking him as a liability within his own criminal organization. The very investigation meant to bring down organized crime may have triggered its brutal internal justice system instead. For investigators still working the McIlquham murder, the shadow of Project Hobart looms large. The key to his execution likely lies somewhere in those thousands of pages of evidence, wiretap transcripts, and financial records, clues to which relationships were damaged beyond repair and which secrets were too dangerous to leave in McIlquham's possession. The moment those charges were dropped, the clock started ticking, explained one former law enforcement officer familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs. It didn't matter that he never talked. What mattered was that people thought he might. In that world, perception is reality. Did Project Hobart's collapse create the conditions for Craig's murder 3 years later? Did former associates worry about what he might reveal if pressured again? Or did rivals see his legal troubles as evidence of weakness, making him a target for elimination? These questions lead directly to the mysterious meeting Craig attended just hours before his death. The Industrial Park mystery, his final hours. What makes Craig McIlquham's murder particularly intriguing is what happened in the hours leading up to his death. Security footage pieced together by investigators reveals a man following his normal routine with no apparent awareness that death was stalking him. Around 4 p.m. on that fateful Tuesday, Craig was captured on security cameras at a gas station in Oakville. He appeared relaxed, alone, and unhurried, filling his tank and buying coffee like thousands of other suburban commuters. But then his movements became far more interesting. At approximately 6:30 p.m., just 2 hours before his death, surveillance footage showed Craig's black SUV pulling into an industrial park in North Burlington. This wasn't his neighborhood, and he had no obvious business there. What made this location particularly significant to investigators was that this same industrial park was known to police as a regular meeting location for outlaw bikers. Craig remained in the area for roughly 20 minutes before departing. Police found no evidence of a planned meeting, no text messages, no calls, no advanced coordination, yet his presence there was clearly intentional. What happened during those 20 minutes? Was he meeting someone, delivering something, settling a dispute? Despite extensive investigation, this critical window remains shrouded in mystery. Even more puzzling is what happened next. The gap between 6:30 p.m. when Craig left the industrial park and his arrival at the Mandarin restaurant around 8 p.m. remains unaccounted for. Where did he go? What did he do? And most importantly, did someone follow him from that industrial park to his final destination? What we do know is that Craig made no effort to vary his route or check for surveillance. His phone records show no unusual activity. He wasn't using burner devices or taking counter-surveillance measures. For someone who'd lived under police scrutiny and reportedly received credible death threats, his behavior seems remarkably careless. Unless, of course, he was exactly where someone wanted him to be. The final hours of Craig McKilquam's life contain a critical puzzle piece that may hold the key to his murder, his unexplained visit to an industrial park on the evening of his death. Security footage captured his black SUV in this area, known to police as a meeting location for outlaw bikers, for approximately 20 minutes between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. What happened during those 20 minutes has become one of the most tantalizing mysteries in the investigation. The industrial park in question sits in a nondescript area of Burlington, a collection of warehouses, distribution centers, and small manufacturing facilities that largely empty out after business hours. By early evening, the area becomes a ghost town of vacant parking lots and darkened buildings, making it ideal for discreet meetings away from prying eyes and surveillance cameras. Investigators have confirmed that Craig had no legitimate business connections to any company in the industrial park. No appointment was logged in his phone, no text messages arranged a meeting, and no calls were placed to or from his phone during this time. His presence there was clearly intentional, yet completely off the official record, a hallmark of someone accustomed to conducting business that leaves no digital footprint. What makes this visit particularly significant is its timing. Just hours before his execution, this wasn't a random stop, but likely the final piece in a sequence of events that culminated in his murder. Did Craig receive information during this meeting that led him to the Mandarin restaurant? Was he given instructions, threatened, or perhaps warned about what was to come? One former Hells Angels member, speaking anonymously to investigators, suggested that such industrial locations often serve as neutral ground for sensitive discussions, territory not directly controlled by any single criminal faction, where parties can meet with reduced risk of surveillance or ambush. If Craig was meeting someone there, it suggests a matter of significant importance or delicacy. More troubling is the possibility that this meeting was part of the setup for his murder. Was Craig deliberately directed to the Mandarin restaurant afterward? Did someone at the industrial park alert the killer that Craig was en route to his final destination? The timing certainly suggests coordination between whoever Craig met at 6:30 p.m. and whoever shot him at 8:21 p.m. Investigators have scoured surveillance cameras from surrounding businesses, but the industrial park's limited security coverage has yielded few clues. One partial image captured a second vehicle, possibly dark-colored, parked near Craig's SUV, but the quality is too poor to identify the make or occupants. The gap between leaving the industrial park and arriving at the Mandarin restaurant remains equally mysterious. Craig's movements during this approximately 90-minute window are unaccounted for. Gas station cameras, traffic lights, and business security systems along possible routes have revealed nothing conclusive about his path or any stops he might have made. This industrial park visit represents the last known action Craig took of his own volition before his murder, a deliberate choice that likely sealed his fate. Whatever transpired during those 20 minutes set in motion the final sequence that would end with a single gunshot in a restaurant parking lot. Until someone breaks the code of silence surrounding Craig's associates, those critical 20 minutes may remain the unsolved heart of this execution. Something happened at that industrial park, a Halton Regional Police investigator told local media. Whether Craig knew he was being set up or whether he was completely blindsided, that location is key to understanding what happened later that night. The industrial park connection raises disturbing questions about premeditation. Was Craig lured to the Mandarin as part of a plan set in motion earlier that day? Did someone at the industrial park meeting decide his fate? These questions lead us to examine the different theories about who wanted Craig McKilquam dead and why. Theories behind the murder: loyalty, betrayal, or business. With the investigation still officially open but growing colder by the day, several theories have emerged about why Craig McKilquam was executed that night in Burlington. The first and perhaps most straightforward theory centers on internal club discipline. The Hells Angels have a documented history of violently enforcing loyalty and secrecy. If Craig violated club rules or protocols, perhaps by skimming profits, speaking to the wrong people, or making unauthorized decisions, the organization might have sanctioned his removal. Some former law enforcement officers point to the professional nature of the hit as evidence of an inside job. The killer knew exactly where to find Craig, how to approach him without raising suspicion, and how to disappear afterward. All hallmarks of someone with inside information. The second theory involves Craig's legal troubles from Project Hobart. Despite charges being dropped, suspicion may have lingered about his reliability. In criminal organizations that operate on absolute trust, even the perception of cooperation with authorities can be fatal. It doesn't matter if he actually talked, explained one former undercover officer. What matters is that he was in a position where he could have. The 3-year gap between his legal troubles and his murder might simply reflect patience, waiting until suspicion had died down before acting. A third possibility is financial or territorial disputes. Craig's involvement in gambling and money laundering operations meant he handled significant amounts of cash and maintained connections with various criminal enterprises. A disagreement over territory, profits, or business arrangements could have escalated to violence. The meeting at the industrial park hours before his death suggests ongoing business negotiations that may have gone sideways. Perhaps most intriguing is the theory that Craig's extensive knowledge made him dangerous. After years in the organization, he would have accumulated damaging information about operations, personnel, and criminal activities. If he was planning to leave the organization, retire, or change allegiances, eliminating him might have been seen as necessary risk management. Finally, there's the possibility of personal vengeance. In Craig's world, grudges can simmer for years before boiling over. Someone with a long-standing grievance, perhaps related to past business dealings, romantic entanglements, or perceived disrespect, may have finally decided to settle accounts permanently. The execution of Craig McKilquam presents investigators with multiple plausible motives, each deeply rooted in the complex world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, where loyalty, betrayal, and business are inextricably intertwined. Understanding which of these factors ultimately led to his death requires peeling back layers of criminal culture that deliberately resist outside scrutiny. In the world of Hell's Angels, loyalty isn't merely valued, it's enforced. The organization operates on a strict hierarchy with clearly defined rules and expectations. Members swear oaths of allegiance that supersede all other relationships, including family ties. Breaking these codes of conduct isn't met with termination letters or lawsuits. Consequences are often swift and violent. If McKilquam violated internal protocols or was perceived to have compromised the organization's security, his elimination may have been sanctioned from within. The betrayal theory centers on the aftermath of Project Hobart. When major criminal cases collapse, participants often look at each other with newfound suspicion. Though McKilquam was never formally labeled an informant, the mere possibility that he might have considered cooperation could mark him for death. In outlaw motorcycle clubs, the appearance of cooperation with authorities can be as damning as actual betrayal. The 3-year gap between the collapse of Project Hobart and McIlquam's murder fits the pattern of organizations that prioritize careful planning over immediate vengeance. A third possibility revolves around business disputes. The criminal enterprises associated with outlaw motorcycle clubs generate millions in revenue from illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and money laundering. These aren't informal operations, but sophisticated networks with substantial investments and profits. Conflicts over territory, profit distribution, or strategic direction can escalate to violence when traditional business remedies aren't available. McIlquam's position near the operational center of the organization would have given him influence over lucrative criminal ventures and potentially made him a target for those wanting a larger share. Some investigators have proposed a hybrid theory that McIlquam was attempting to distance himself from criminal activities following his legal troubles. In organized crime, there's often no such thing as a clean exit. Knowledge of operations, contacts, and methodologies makes former members dangerous liabilities. If McIlquam was trying to extricate himself from the organization while maintaining his suburban life, this alone could have triggered his elimination. The industrial park meeting hours before his death may point to yet another possibility: that McIlquam had become entangled in a power struggle within the organization. Such transitions are particularly dangerous moments in criminal hierarchies, where succession isn't governed by bylaws, but by alliances, intimidation, and sometimes bloodshed. Was he summoned to that meeting to be warned, threatened, or given one last chance to fall in line? What makes this case particularly confounding is that these theories aren't mutually exclusive. In the complex ecosystem of organized crime, motives blend and overlap. McIlquam may have violated loyalty protocols while also threatening business interests and appearing potentially cooperative with authorities. A perfect storm of factors that made him too dangerous to remain alive. For Halton Regional Police, the challenge isn't finding a motive, but rather determining which of many possible motives ultimately triggered the professional hit, until someone from McIlquam's inner circle breaks ranks, an unlikely prospect given the consequences. The true reasoning behind his execution may remain as carefully buried as the gun that ended his double life. What's clear from all these theories is that Craig McIlquam's death wasn't random. It was the calculated elimination of a man who knew too much, had crossed the wrong people, or simply outlived his usefulness to a dangerous organization. His story serves as a stark reminder that in the criminal underworld, no one is untouchable, no secret stays buried forever, and loyalty lasts only until it becomes a liability. The search for Craig's killer continues, with police still seeking information about that grey Honda Civic and what really happened during those mysterious 20 minutes at the industrial park. Until someone breaks the code of silence, Craig's murder remains another unsolved chapter in the violent history of outlaw motorcycle clubs in Canada. The family man behind the patch. Behind the Hells Angels patch and the nickname Truck, Craig McIlquam was also a family man. On the night he was murdered, witnesses report he wasn't alone at the Mandarin restaurant. His family was waiting inside. This detail adds another layer of tragedy to an already shocking crime. While Craig navigated the dangerous waters of outlaw motorcycle club life, he also maintained connections to a normal family existence that was shattered in an instant on that April evening. He was having dinner with his family when it happened. One restaurant patron recalled, "One minute everything's normal, the next there's chaos in the parking lot and children are crying. It was horrible." This duality defined Craig's existence. To his family, he was a provider, a father, a husband. To law enforcement and his criminal associates, he was Truck McIlquam, a patched Hells Angels member with deep connections across Ontario's criminal landscape. Maintaining these separate identities required constant vigilance and compartmentalization, skills Craig had mastered over his years in the club. What makes the timing of the hit particularly cold-blooded was the choice to strike when Craig's family was nearby. Was this simply opportunity, or was it a calculated message? In the world of organized crime, how and where someone is killed often carries symbolic weight. A public execution outside a family restaurant could be interpreted as a warning to others. No one is untouchable, nowhere is safe, and family connections won't protect you. The presence of Craig's family that night raises questions about what they knew of his double life. Were they aware of his Hells Angels affiliation? Had they been sheltered from this reality, or were they active participants in maintaining his cover? In the aftermath of his death, his family retreated from public view, protected by both police and, reportedly, members of Craig's chapter. Behind the hardened exterior of Craig McKilquam, the patched Hells Angel who met his violent end in a Burlington parking lot, existed another identity entirely. Craig Brown, a family man whose suburban life in Oakville revealed a completely different side of his complex personality. This duality wasn't merely a cover story, but a genuine parallel existence that those closest to him insist was equally authentic. In Oakville's Falgarwood neighborhood, Craig was known as a present and engaged father. Neighbors recall seeing him coaching his son's hockey team on weekends, his booming voice calling encouragement from the sidelines. During summer months, he was often spotted meticulously maintaining his lawn, exchanging casual conversation about property values and neighborhood developments. These weren't performances, but genuine aspects of a man who compartmentalized his life with remarkable discipline. He never missed a school concert, recalled one neighbor who lived across the street for over 7 years. You'd see him sitting there, recording everything on his phone like any other proud dad. Nothing about him screamed organized crime or dangerous. He was just Craig, who always had time to help you jumpstart your car in winter. His modest 2-story home contained no obvious signs of criminal wealth, no flashy vehicles in the driveway, no ostentatious renovations that might draw attention. Craig drove a sensible black SUV, wore casual but unremarkable clothing, and maintained the kind of middle-class lifestyle that blends seamlessly into suburban Ontario. This restraint wasn't coincidental, but calculated, part of his strategy to separate his criminal associations from his family sanctuary. Craig's wife, Maria, name changed for privacy, has remained intensely private since his death, declining all interview requests. Friends describe her as initially shocked by her husband's murder, but not by the revelations about his Hells Angels affiliation. This suggests a relationship built on an unspoken understanding. Maria may not have known operational details, but likely recognized the source of their financial stability came from beyond Craig's vague consulting business. His children present perhaps the most poignant aspect of his divided life. Craig was, by all accounts, a devoted father who attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and created boundaries to keep his criminal activities entirely separate from his parenting role. The tragedy of his murder extends beyond his own death to include the traumatic shattering of his children's understanding of their father. What makes Craig's case so compelling is that neither side of his life appears to have been purely performative. Associates from his Hells Angels connections describe a man who genuinely valued his family life and worked diligently to keep them insulated from his criminal endeavors. Meanwhile, those who knew him as a neighbor and father insist his warmth and engagement in community life were authentic, not merely a calculated facade. This duality raises profound questions about identity and compartmentalization. Was Craig Brown the real person, with Hells Angel Craig McKilquam being the necessary persona he adopted to support his family? Or was his outlaw identity his true self, with the suburban dad being the carefully constructed alternative? Perhaps most accurately, he was simply both, a man who navigated two authentic but incompatible worlds until that fatal moment when they violently collided. This family connection shows how organized crime impacts not just its direct participants, but creates ripple effects that extend to innocent bystanders. While Craig chose his path, his family became collateral damage in a world they may not have fully understood. A world that eventually reached out and claimed Craig in front of a popular suburban restaurant. International connections, a web of relationships. Craig Truck McKilquam wasn't just connected locally. His influence and relationships spanned across borders. In the days following his murder, his memorial page received tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and various Caribbean islands. These international connections point to a man whose reach extended far beyond the GTA, raising questions about what exactly his role was within the larger Hells Angels organization. Truck was respected everywhere, wrote one commenter from St. Martin in the Caribbean. Another from Zurich posted simply, "Brotherhood is forever. Ride in peace." The absence of public Canadian tributes was notable. potentially indicating caution among local associates who didn't want to draw police attention. But the international outpouring suggested McKilquem had built relationships across the global Hells Angels network, a feat that typically indicates significant status within the organization. Law enforcement sources familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs note that international connections often relate to drug trafficking, money laundering, or other cross-border criminal enterprises. The Caribbean, in particular, has long served as both a vacation destination and financial hub for organized crime figures looking to move or hide assets. When someone has contacts in Switzerland, the Caribbean, and Denmark, they're not just a local enforcer, explained one former intelligence officer who specialized in outlaw motorcycle gangs. Those are strategic locations for financial operations, drug routes, and organizational networking. Craig McKilquem's murder investigation revealed a dimension of his life that extended far beyond Ontario's borders, an intricate web of international relationships that connected his activities to a global criminal network. While the Hells Angels are often perceived as a localized threat, the reality is far more complex. They operate as a sophisticated multinational organization with chapters in over 50 countries and an estimated 5,000 members worldwide. McKilquem's role within this international framework appears to have been more substantial than initially suspected. Intelligence files recovered during Project Hobart revealed his frequent travel to Europe, particularly to the Netherlands and Germany, where the Hells Angels maintain a strong presence. These weren't vacation trips, but working relationships. McKilquem serving as a liaison between Canadian operations and their European counterparts. Financial forensics conducted during the investigation exposed a pattern of international money movements that suggested McKilquem wasn't merely a foot soldier, but rather a trusted facilitator in cross-border operations. Banking records showed complex transactions flowing through accounts in Luxembourg and Cyprus before reaching final destinations in Canada, a sophisticated money laundering operation that required both technical knowledge and high-level connections. McKilquem operated at the nexus of international relationships, noted one organized crime analyst familiar with the case. He understood both the Canadian criminal landscape and how it interconnected with operations abroad. That made him valuable, and eventually vulnerable. His connections extended beyond Europe to Asia as well. In the 3 years prior to his murder, McKilquem made multiple trips to Thailand and Vietnam, countries where outlaw motorcycle clubs have expanded their presence dramatically in recent years. These emerging markets for both legitimate and criminal enterprises represent new frontiers for organizations like the Hells Angels, who have been establishing footholds throughout Southeast Asia. What makes these international connections particularly relevant to McKilquem's murder is the possibility that the order for his execution may not have originated locally. Criminal organizations with global reach can exercise authority across borders, with decisions made in Amsterdam or Bangkok potentially triggering actions in Burlington, Ontario. This international dimension exponentially complicates investigations, as motives may lie thousands of miles from the crime scene. Perhaps most intriguing was a series of encrypted communications recovered from McKilquem's devices. Though heavily protected, forensic specialists managed to decode fragments of conversations with contacts in Australia and South Africa. These discussions referenced what appeared to be a significant reorganization within the global Hells Angels structure, a potential power shift that could have left McKilquem caught between competing factions. This international context may explain why the case has proven so difficult to solve. Witnesses fear not just local repercussions, but the reach of a truly global organization. Evidence trails disappear across international borders. Potential suspects may not even reside in Canada. The professional hit could have been carried out by someone brought in specifically for the job, entering the country briefly and departing immediately afterward. For investigators, McKilquem's international connections represent both a promising avenue of inquiry and a frustrating obstacle. Every new relationship uncovered branches into dozens more, creating an ever-expanding network that stretches resources thin. Yet somewhere in this global web may lie the answer to who decided Craig McKilquem's double life had reached its end, and dispatched a professional to ensure it. These international relationships shed light on another potential motive for Craig's murder. If he was involved in coordinating cross-border operations, any disruption in those activities could mean millions in lost revenue. A dispute over international business, perhaps triggered by his previous legal troubles from Project Hobart, might have made powerful enemies both at home and abroad. McIlquham's global connections also explain the professional nature of his killing. Someone with his reach would only be targeted after careful consideration of the consequences. His murder wasn't just the elimination of one man, it represented a significant disruption in a network that spanned continents. A decision that wouldn't have been made lightly or by lower-ranking individuals. The road name, Why Truck, mattered. In outlaw motorcycle club culture, road names aren't just nicknames, they're identities that often reveal something significant about the person. Craig McIlquham was known throughout the biker world as Truck, a moniker that carried weight and meaning within the organization. Understanding why he was called Truck provides insights into his role and reputation within the Hells Angels. Road names aren't random, explains one former motorcycle club member who left the life behind. They stick because they capture something essential about the person, whether it's something they did, how they look, or their role in the club. So why Truck? Sources familiar with McIlquham suggest the nickname reflected his imposing physical presence and his reliability. Like a truck, he was solid, dependable, and capable of handling heavy loads, whether those were literal responsibilities or metaphorical burdens within the organization. Others suggest it stemmed from his earlier career in logistics before becoming fully immersed in club life. Road names also serve a practical purpose in the criminal world. They provide a layer of insulation when discussing club business. Law enforcement intercepting communications about Truck handling a situation would have a harder time establishing in court that this referred specifically to Craig McIlquham, offering a thin but useful layer of deniability. Within the Hells Angels, being known by your road name across multiple chapters indicates a certain level of respect and recognition. The international tributes to Truck, rather than to Craig, show how his identity within the club had become his primary persona in certain circles. This dual identity, Craig to his family, Truck to his brothers, mirrors the compartmentalization that defined his life. The road name also gives us clues about his history. Earning a name like Truck suggests years of building a reputation for reliability and strength. This wasn't someone who had recently patched in. This was a veteran with enough history to have developed a distinct identity within the organization. That long history means he would have accumulated significant knowledge about operations, personalities, and secrets, potentially making him both valuable and dangerous. Road names in clubs like the Hells Angels serve multiple practical purposes. They provide members with an additional layer of insulation from law enforcement, create brotherhood bonds through shared internal language, and often reflect a member's reputation, physical characteristics, or significant incidents from their past. For Craig, the name Truck wasn't randomly assigned, but earned through specific actions and attributes that defined his role. According to former associates, the name originated early in Craig's affiliation with the club. His imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing over 250 pounds, provided the obvious connection, but the nickname carried deeper significance. In outlaw biker culture, to be a truck meant being reliable, powerful, and capable of moving heavy loads without complaint, both literally and figuratively. When something needed to get done, especially something difficult, Truck was who you called, explained one former associate who requested anonymity. The name wasn't just about his size, it was about dependability when things got complicated. This reliability extended beyond physical intimidation to logistical operations. Craig's background in transportation before joining the Hells Angels gave him specialized knowledge that proved valuable for moving both legal and illegal cargo. His understanding of shipping routes, customs procedures, and transportation regulations made him an asset for cross-border operations that formed the backbone of the organization's business interests. The road name Truck carried significant status within the club. Unlike more colorful or derogatory nicknames often assigned to newer members, Craig's moniker reflected respect and acknowledged his utility to the organization. When members referred to Truck, they were invoking not just a person, but a known quantity. someone with established credibility and a specific skill set. In the aftermath of his murder, the name Truck has taken on new significance. Within club circles, references to his death are made using only this road name, a final acknowledgement of his identity within the organization. For investigators, understanding the full implications of this nickname has provided valuable insight into Craig's role and the potential motivations behind his execution. The man may have died in a Burlington parking lot, but the legacy of Truck continues to reverberate through the criminal underworld he inhabited. As investigators pieced together the final days of Craig Truck McKilquam, they had to consider both identities, the suburban father and the patched Hell's Angel, to understand why someone decided he needed to die. The road name that followed him for years ultimately became part of his legacy in death, appearing in tributes from brothers around the world who knew him not as Craig, but always as Truck. The Code of Silence: Why the Case Went Cold. Despite the public nature of Craig McKilquam's execution, the investigation quickly hit a wall that's familiar to anyone who's worked organized crime cases: the unbreakable Code of Silence. This omerta, borrowed from traditional mafia culture but equally powerful in outlaw motorcycle clubs, ensures that witnesses don't cooperate, associates don't talk, and even peripheral figures maintain absolute silence when questioned by authorities. We had dozens of potential witnesses. One frustrated Holton Regional Police detective told local media months after the shooting. People who were in the restaurant, people who may have seen the shooter, people who knew Craig's movements that day. But almost no one would talk substantively. It was like hitting a brick wall. The effectiveness of this code is particularly evident in how quickly the investigation stalled. Despite the murder occurring in a busy public location with numerous witnesses, police struggled to develop actionable leads. The grey Honda Civic spotted near the scene was never located. Surveillance footage provided only vague descriptions of the shooter. Even Craig's known associates claimed to have no insights into why he might have been targeted. This wall of silence extends beyond direct Hells Angels members. Anyone connected to the club's extended network, from girlfriends and family members to business partners and even legitimate acquaintances, understands that cooperation with police can have severe consequences. The threat doesn't need to be stated explicitly. It's simply understood as an immutable rule of engagement with this world. It's not just fear of physical retribution, explains one academic who studies outlaw motorcycle gangs. It's a cultural norm. Cooperating with law enforcement makes you an outcast not just from the club, but from an entire social ecosystem. For many people, that's their whole world. The few people who spoke to police provided only the most basic information, carefully avoiding anything that might actually help solve the case. This calculated approach to providing minimal cooperation without actually assisting the investigation is a sophisticated tactic that outlaw motorcycle clubs have perfected over decades of law enforcement scrutiny. For investigators, breaking this code becomes the primary challenge in solving cases like Craig's murder. Without witnesses willing to come forward, without insiders providing context, and without anyone breaking ranks, even a public execution can remain unsolved indefinitely. This culture of silence doesn't just protect the specific individuals involved in Craig's murder, it protects the entire organizational structure and operational security of the club. The legacy, what his death reveals about modern organized crime.
A man in his 50s was gunned down last night in the parking lot of the Mandarin restaurant in Burlington. Police confirmed that the victim had just finished dining at the buffet before being shot outside.
The murder of Craig Truck McKilquam offers a rare window into the evolution of organized crime in Canada. Far from the stereotypical biker image of the 1970s and 80s, today's outlaw motorcycle clubs operate with sophisticated business models, international connections, and members who can seamlessly blend into suburban life while maintaining their criminal affiliations. This isn't Sons of Anarchy, explained one organized crime analyst. Modern outlaw motorcycle clubs are essentially multinational corporations with violent enforcement divisions. They have diversified revenue streams, risk management strategies, and members specifically selected for their ability to move between different worlds. Craig's double life exemplifies this evolution. his ability to maintain a quiet suburban existence while simultaneously operating within the Hells Angels reflects how the organization has adapted to increased law enforcement scrutiny. Rather than standing out, many members now focus on blending in, maintaining legitimate businesses, living in respectable neighborhoods, and saving their colors for club functions rather than daily wear. The professional nature of his execution also demonstrates the calculated approach modern criminal organizations take toward internal discipline or conflict resolution. This wasn't a bar fight gone wrong or an impulsive act of revenge. It was a carefully planned operation with clear objectives, precise execution, and a clean getaway. Such sophistication suggests an organization with resources, planning capabilities, and operational security protocols more commonly associated with intelligence agencies than street gangs. Craig's international connections reveal another aspect of modern organized crime: its global reach. The tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and the Caribbean show how today's criminal networks transcend borders, leveraging technology and globalization just as legitimate businesses do. These aren't isolated local clubs, but interconnected organizations with global infrastructure. Perhaps most telling is how the investigation into Craig's murder stalled against the wall of silence. Despite significant advances in forensic technology, surveillance capabilities, and investigative techniques, law enforcement still struggles to penetrate organizations built on absolute loyalty and ruthless enforcement of internal rules. The code that protected the secrets of criminal organizations a century ago remains equally effective today. Craig McKilquam's story ended in that Burlington parking lot, but what his life and death reveal about the changing face of organized crime will continue to challenge law enforcement, fascinate the public, and influence how we understand the criminal underworld operating in plain sight within our communities. His murder remains officially unsolved, another cold case that demonstrates how effective the code of silence can be, even in an age where privacy seems increasingly impossible to maintain. The next time you pass a quiet suburban home or see a businessman in a coffee shop, remember Craig McKilquam. Behind the ordinary facade of everyday life, parallel worlds can exist. Worlds with their own rules, hierarchies, and consequences for those who step out of line. In the end, Craig's story isn't just about one man's murder. It's about the shadowy organizations that continue to evolve and operate despite society's best efforts to contain them.
It was quite the scene on Route 177 in Westport this morning as 12 News cameras captured FBI, Westport Police, and Massachusetts State Police gang unit on the property of Hells Angels clubhouses.
The black smoke billowing into the Hunter Valley sky on that quiet Wednesday morning told only part of the story. As flames ripped through the compound of what had been Australia's most impenetrable motorcycle clubhouse, emergency services racing toward the Portland Street address had no idea they were witnessing the final chapter of a 6-decade empire. But this story doesn't begin with fire and destruction. It begins with something far more mundane, yet infinitely more dangerous in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. The Fortress on Portland Street.
I don't put a vehicle across the entrance to my street, do I?
2013, eh?
For over 60 years, the Gladiators Motorcycle Club had been a fixture in Maitland, their clubhouse standing like a medieval castle in suburban Australia. The compound wasn't just a meeting place, it was a statement of permanence. Towering wrought iron gates, styled like a medieval fortress, protected corrugated iron and dark brick structures that housed decades of outlaw motorcycle history. Security cameras monitored every approach. Floodlights could illuminate the entire perimeter. Heavy steel doors and tinted windows suggested that whatever happened inside was meant to stay inside. The most distinctive feature wasn't the fortress-like architecture, it was the swimming pool. Tiled across the bottom was the Gladiators logo, visible even from satellite images, a bold declaration of ownership that could be seen from the sky. This wasn't a temporary outpost or a rented space. This was a monument to longevity in a world where most organizations measured their existence in years, not decades. Inside the clubhouse, the walls displayed memorabilia, old photos, patches, club flags, and framed articles detailing their decades-long history. Founded in 1960, the Gladiators represented one of Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle clubs, their patches carrying the weight of historical significance that commanded respect even from rivals. Their network extended beyond Maitland to include chapters in Grafton and Gunnedah, creating a regional presence that had weathered police raids, internal conflicts, and the rise and fall of numerous rival organizations. But what the members gathering for their annual general meeting party didn't know was that their fortress was about to face its greatest test, not from police or traditional rivals, but from a global organization with resources and ruthlessness that would make their 6 decades of survival experience irrelevant within a matter of days. The Gladiators weren't just criminals hiding behind motorcycle culture. They were embedded in their community in complex ways. The club became known for organizing the infamous bike, car, and tattoo show at the Maitland Showgrounds and later at the old Maitland Jail. The Grafton chapter gained recognition for hosting Jacka Bash boxing exhibitions. These public-facing activities created identities that extended beyond purely outlaw enterprises, allowing the club to establish community connections while maintaining their rebellious status. This dual existence, part community institution, part criminal organization, had allowed the Gladiators to survive when other clubs collapsed under police pressure or internal strife. They understood that longevity required more than just intimidation and illegal income. It demanded becoming part of the fabric of their region, creating relationships and dependencies that made their removal complicated and costly for authorities. But this community integration also created vulnerabilities. Public events meant public exposure. Community connections meant more people observing and potentially reporting on club activities. Most dangerously, the respect and reputation built over 6 decades created expectations of behavior and response that could be exploited by rivals who understood the unwritten codes governing outlaw motorcycle culture. When respect becomes currency.
So I said, let me find out and let me ask. So I called Minneapolis Custom Cycles because I knew Pat owned it.
In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, respect isn't just a courtesy, it's the currency that prevents wars. Every gesture, every interaction, every moment of acknowledgement or dismissal carries weight that outsiders struggle to understand. When members of different clubs encounter each other, particularly at formal events like annual general meeting parties, elaborate protocols govern behavior. These unwritten rules have evolved over decades to prevent the kind of violence that attracts unwanted law enforcement attention while maintaining the hierarchical structures that define outlaw culture. The handshake is perhaps the most fundamental of these rituals. It acknowledges the other person's status, shows respect for their organization, and demonstrates that despite rivalry or competition, certain civilized standards will be maintained. To refuse a handshake isn't just rude, it's a public declaration of disrespect that demands response. The refusal communicates that the person being snubbed is considered unworthy of basic recognition, that their status means nothing, and that their organization deserves no courtesy. What happened at that Gladiators AGM party would soon demonstrate how quickly respect can transform into violence, how individual actions can doom entire organizations, and how 6 decades of careful relationship building can be destroyed by a single moment of poor judgment. But the full consequences wouldn't become apparent until masked figures began surrounding the fortress-like compound in numbers that made resistance impossible. According to the anonymous source, who would later reveal the true origins of the conflict, the atmosphere at the Gladiators' annual general meeting party was initially positive. Most members were respectful when interacting with guests from other clubs. The evening was proceeding according to the established social protocols that allowed rival organizations to coexist in the same space without violence. Music played, drinks flowed, and the careful dance of outlaw motorcycle diplomacy unfolded as it had countless times before. But then came the moment that would change everything. One Gladiators member refused to shake his hand twice and completely snubbed him. The identity of the Hells Angels member who was disrespected remains unknown, but his status within that organization clearly demanded a response. The fact that the refusal happened twice suggests the Hells Angels member initially gave the Gladiators member an opportunity to correct his behavior, extending his hand again after the first snub. When respect was refused a second time, the situation moved beyond simple misunderstanding into deliberate insult. This double refusal created a bit of tension that rippled through the party. Other members from both clubs would have witnessed the interaction. In outlaw motorcycle culture, such public disrespect cannot be ignored without appearing weak. The Hells Angels member who was snubbed faced a choice: respond immediately and risk escalating the situation into violence at a social event, or handle the matter through official channels that would involve his club's leadership. He chose the latter, a decision that would prove far more catastrophic for the Gladiators than any individual confrontation might have been. The ultimatum that split a brotherhood. What happened next reveals the sophisticated nature of power dynamics within outlaw motorcycle club hierarchies. Rather than seeking personal revenge, the disrespected Hells Angels member reported the incident to his leadership, who then issued a formal ultimatum to the Gladiators organization: deal with their own guy for disrespecting the Angels, or the Angels would step in themselves. This ultimatum wasn't simply about punishment, it was a test of the Gladiators' internal discipline and their willingness to maintain the respect protocols that governed inter-club relationships. The Hells Angels were essentially saying, prove that your organization has standards and can police its own members' behavior, or we'll assume you've collectively chosen disrespect and will respond accordingly. But what the Hells Angels may not have anticipated, or perhaps exactly what they hoped for, was that this ultimatum would shatter the Gladiators from within, creating the perfect conditions for something far more ambitious than simple retribution. Within days, masked figures would surround the fortress with an offer that would make the original disrespect seem trivial by comparison. The Gladiators' response revealed fatal internal divisions that had likely been building for years beneath the surface of brotherhood unity. Half the club agreed to sort it out, but others refused and wanted to stand their ground. This split wasn't just about how to handle one disrespectful member. It reflected deeper disagreements about the club's direction, leadership, and relationship with larger organizations. Some members apparently favored discipline and diplomatic resolution, understanding that maintaining respect protocols was essential for organizational survival. Others viewed the ultimatum itself as disrespectful, believing that no outside organization should dictate internal Gladiators' discipline. This fracture exploded within the club, creating the kind of internal chaos that makes organizations vulnerable to external exploitation. When half the membership opposes the other half on a fundamental question of club authority and response, effective decision-making becomes impossible. Leadership cannot maintain order when the organization splits into opposing factions. Security becomes compromised when members question whether their brothers can be trusted. Most dangerously, word of internal division inevitably reaches rivals who understand that divided clubs cannot mount coherent resistance to external pressure. The speed with which this internal disagreement escalated suggests that the handshake incident was merely the catalyst for pre-existing tensions within the Gladiators. Perhaps older members who had built the club's reputation over 6 decades disagreed with younger members about respect protocols. Maybe financial pressures or previous police actions had created stress within the organization. Possibly leadership disputes had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a crisis to bring them into the open. Whatever the underlying causes, the Hells Angels' ultimatum exposed fault lines that made the entire organization vulnerable to exploitation. The point of no return.
As part of the government crackdown, the Finks were the first biker club in the country to be declared a criminal organisation, under the kind of laws rarely used in modern democracies.
As the Gladiators struggled with internal division, the Hells Angels were making their own calculations. According to the anonymous source, the Angels didn't start the fire, but just saw an opening and took full advantage. This suggests that what followed wasn't simply revenge for disrespect, but a strategic opportunity to achieve something the Hells Angels had perhaps been planning for much longer: expansion into the Hunter region. The Hells Angels are a global organization with international resources and experience in territorial expansion. Their approach to growing their Australian presence follows patterns they've refined worldwide: identify vulnerable clubs, exploit weaknesses, overwhelm resistance, and absorb territory. The Gladiators' internal fracture presented exactly the kind of opportunity that experienced expansion strategists recognize and act upon quickly before the target organization can recover its stability. The decision was made. Within days, residents of the quiet Portland Street area would witness something unprecedented: a convoy of up to 50 motorcycles converging on the medieval fortress, their riders' faces concealed behind balaclavas, carrying an ultimatum that would end 60 years of independence in a single conversation. The Hells Angels' response to the Gladiators' internal division was swift and overwhelming. Rather than waiting to see if the club could resolve its problems internally, they moved to capitalize on the weakness immediately. Intelligence gathering within outlaw motorcycle networks is sophisticated and rapid. Word of the Gladiators' internal conflict would have reached Hells Angels leadership within hours of the split occurring. Strategic planning sessions would have followed, with senior members calculating the resources needed for a successful takeover and the timing required to prevent the Gladiators from recovering their unity. The formation of the Hells Angels Hunter Crew chapter, officially established in 2025 according to their website, suggests this expansion had been planned well before the handshake incident provided justification. The infrastructure for regional expansion was already being developed: leadership structures, recruitment targets, territorial objectives. The Gladiators' internal crisis simply accelerated a timeline that was already in motion, providing perfect cover for an aggressive move that might otherwise have seemed unprovoked. The Hells Angels' existing Steel City chapter in Newcastle provided the operational base for Hunter region expansion. From Newcastle, they could deploy resources, coordinate logistics, and maintain supply lines for sustained operations in Maitland. This geographic advantage, combined with their international backing and experience, gave them capabilities that the fracturing Gladiators couldn't match, even under the best circumstances. The internal division merely eliminated their last hope of coherent resistance. The storm arrives. The morning when everything changed began like any other in the Portland Street area. Residents went about their routines, unaware that their quiet neighborhood was about to become the center of one of the most significant power shifts in Australian outlaw motorcycle history. The fortress-like compound stood as it had for decades, its medieval gates and security cameras maintaining their eternal vigil over what its occupants believed was impregnable territory. Then came the sound of engines. Not one or two motorcycles, but dozens. A convoy that witnesses would later describe as resembling a military operation more than a social visit. Up to 50 Hells Angels members arrived at the Gladiators clubhouse, their faces concealed behind balaclavas, creating an intimidating presence that left no doubt about their intentions. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a demonstration of overwhelming force designed to eliminate any possibility of resistance. What happened next would be described by witnesses as chaos and a well-planned operation, but the true genius of the Hells Angels approach wouldn't become apparent until much later, when investigators began piecing together how months of intelligence gathering had identified the perfect moment to strike. The handshake incident hadn't caused this confrontation. It had merely provided the excuse for something far more calculated. The visual impact of 50 motorcycles surrounding the compound was carefully choreographed for maximum psychological effect. The balaclavas ensured that individual members couldn't be identified by security cameras or witnesses, while creating an anonymous, threatening presence that suggested military-level organization. The sheer number of participants demonstrated resources that the fractured Gladiators couldn't hope to match. Even if they had been unified and prepared, facing such overwhelming numbers would have been daunting. Divided as they were, resistance was impossible. The timing of the operation revealed sophisticated planning. Arriving when most members would be present, but not necessarily alert or prepared for confrontation, maximized the element of surprise. The Hells Angels would have studied the compound's security arrangements, identified optimal approach routes, and calculated response times for law enforcement. Every element of the operation appeared designed to achieve maximum impact while minimizing the risk of escalation into violence that might draw unwanted police attention. Witnesses described the Hells Angels' arrival as chaos, but from the attacker's perspective, it represented careful orchestration. The convoy's formation, the coordinated deployment around the compound, and the disciplined behavior of 50 potentially armed individuals suggests command structure and operational planning worthy of military analysis. This wasn't gang violence. It was strategic territorial acquisition executed with precision that demonstrated the Hells Angels' experience in such operations worldwide. The ultimatum that ended an empire. Standing before the assembled Gladiators members, surrounded by 50 Hells Angels with concealed faces, the ultimatum was delivered with the kind of stark simplicity that eliminates confusion. Patch over or get out. 3 words that represented the end of 60 years of independence and the beginning of a new order in the Hunter region. In outlaw motorcycle culture, patching over represents the ultimate surrender. Members must literally remove their original club patches and replace them with those of the conquering organization. It's not just changing jackets, it's abandoning identity, surrendering brotherhood bonds built over decades, and accepting subordinate status within the hierarchy of the victorious club. For many members, their club patches aren't just symbols, they're tattooed on their bodies, representing permanent commitment that can't be undone even if the patches are removed. The psychological trauma of this moment cannot be overstated. Imagine being told that your family name, your heritage, and your identity must be discarded and replaced with that of your conquerors. Some Gladiators members would choose to walk away entirely, rather than submit to this humiliation, but others would make calculations that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The binary nature of the ultimatum was strategically brilliant. By offering no middle ground, no negotiation, no compromise, no gradual transition, the Hells Angels forced immediate decisions that prevented the Gladiators from regrouping or organizing resistance. Patch over or get out eliminated extended deliberation that might have allowed the fractured club to reunify around opposition to the takeover. Each member faced an individual choice that had to be made in the moment, under pressure, without time for collective consultation. The demand to surrender their colors struck at the very heart of outlaw motorcycle identity. These patches represent more than club membership. They symbolize brotherhood, shared sacrifice, and years of commitment that can't be easily discarded. Many members have invested decades of their lives building relationships and status within their organization. The Hells Angels' ultimatum demanded they treat all of that history as worthless, replaceable with new allegiances that would always mark them as conquered, rather than founding members. Some Gladiators members reportedly left on their own, rather than face the choice between submission and confrontation. This option, voluntary departure from the scene, represented the only way to maintain personal dignity while avoiding both the humiliation of patching over and the danger of resistance. These members essentially chose exile from the outlaw motorcycle world rather than accepting subordinate status within a conquering organization. Their departure further weakened the Gladiators by removing potential resistance while simultaneously demonstrating the futility of opposition. Others found themselves facing impossible calculations. Submit to the Hells Angels and become the lowest-ranking members of an organization they had previously considered rivals, starting over despite decades of experience and relationships. Or refuse and face the consequences from 50 potentially armed adversaries who had already demonstrated their willingness to use overwhelming force. The reported internal division that had preceded this confrontation meant that members couldn't even count on unified support from their own brothers in whatever decision they made. The aftermath of conquest.
It was quite the scene on Route 177 in Westport this morning as 12 News cameras captured FBI, Westport Police, and Massachusetts State Police gang unit on the property of Hells Angels clubhouses.
The immediate aftermath of the Hells Angels ultimatum created a power vacuum that rippled throughout the Hunter region's underworld. The Gladiators' 6-decade control of Maitland territory had created networks of relationships, business arrangements, and territorial understandings that suddenly became obsolete. Local businesses accustomed to dealing with familiar gladiators' faces now had to adapt to new relationships with Hells Angels members. Protection arrangements that had operated for years needed renegotiation. Territory that had been respected for decades came under new management. The speed of the club's collapse surprised even experienced observers of outlaw motorcycle politics. According to the anonymous source, the internal disagreement over how to respond to the Hells Angels' original ultimatum about the handshake incident had exploded, leading to the club being shut down nationwide, all because of one member's actions. This rapid disintegration suggests that the gladiators' problems extended far beyond the immediate confrontation with the Hells Angels. Structural weaknesses had been building for years, requiring only the right catalyst to trigger complete organizational failure. But the Hells Angels weren't content with simply absorbing the gladiators' Maitland territory. Their strategic vision extended throughout the entire Hunter region, and what happened next would demonstrate their willingness to use any means necessary to solidify their newly claimed dominance. The fortress that had stood for 60 years was about to face its final test. The psychological impact on surviving gladiators members who chose neither to patch over nor to leave entirely created ongoing security concerns for both the Hells Angels and law enforcement. These displaced individuals possessed intimate knowledge of club operations, territorial arrangements, and criminal activities, making them potential intelligence sources for rivals or authorities. Their loyalty to their former organization, combined with resentment over its destruction, created possibilities for revenge actions that could destabilize the Hells Angels' newly claimed territory. Law enforcement agencies faced immediate challenges in adapting their intelligence networks to account for the power shift. Officers who had spent years building knowledge about gladiators' operations, membership hierarchies, and territorial boundaries suddenly found their expertise partially obsolete. New relationships had to be developed with Hells Angels members now controlling Maitland territory. Surveillance targets shifted as familiar faces disappeared and new ones emerged. The entire regional criminal ecosystem required reassessment and mapping. The economic implications extended beyond immediate law enforcement concerns. The gladiators' long-established presence in Maitland had created revenue streams from both legal and illegal activities that now came under Hells Angels' control. Protection payments from businesses, preferred access to entertainment venues, employment opportunities for associates, and territories for merchandise distribution. All of these economic networks required integration into the Hells Angels' existing operations. The disruption of established arrangements created opportunities for other criminal organizations to exploit the temporary instability while the new power structure solidified. The fortress burns. Days after the Hells Angels' ultimatum shattered the gladiators' organization, the fortress-like clubhouse that had stood as a symbol of permanence for 60 years faced its ultimate destruction. The morning of the firebombing began quietly, with no indication that Portland Street was about to witness one of the most dramatic acts of property destruction in Australian outlaw motorcycle history. Just after 10 a.m., on what witnesses described as a quiet Wednesday morning, the peace was shattered by an explosion that sent black smoke billowing into the Hunter Valley sky. A vehicle, already set alight, had been driven directly through the compound's gates and into the storage shed, creating an impact that sent flames ripping through the compound. The timing, broad daylight rather than under cover of darkness, suggested the perpetrators wanted maximum visibility for their message. The burning car smashing through those medieval-style gates represented more than property destruction. It was the final erasure of the gladiators' territorial claims, a fire that would consume not just buildings, but the last remnants of 60 years of organizational history. But the presence of a badly burned man at the scene would raise questions about whether this act of destruction had gone according to plan. The technical sophistication of the attack revealed careful planning rather than impulsive revenge. The vehicle was already set alight before being driven through the gates, indicating preparation and coordination. The target selection, hitting the gates and storage shed rather than the main clubhouse structure, demonstrated tactical thinking designed to maximize symbolic impact while potentially destroying evidence of club activities that might be valuable to law enforcement investigations. Gates represent the boundary between club territory and the outside world. Their destruction symbolically eliminated this separation and announced that the old territorial claims no longer applied. Emergency services arrived within minutes of the explosion, but the damage was already done. The flames had already consumed much of what they were intended to destroy, leaving parts of the clubhouse exterior scorched and melted from intense heat. The rapid response time suggests that the fire was reported immediately, possibly by neighbors disturbed by the sound of the crash and explosion. However, the attackers had calculated correctly. Their message would be delivered regardless of how quickly authorities responded. The discovery of a 63-year-old man at the scene with burns, who was subsequently arrested under police guard, added complexity to what initially appeared to be a straightforward arson case. His presence raised immediate questions. Was he involved in the firebombing, possibly as the driver of the burning vehicle? Was he a Gladiators member attempting to defend the property? Or was he an innocent bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? His injuries suggested direct involvement with the fire, but his exact role remained unclear as he was taken into custody for medical treatment and questioning. Law enforcement mobilizes.
On the Hells Angels. At 4 rendezvous points, officers prepare to simultaneously raid 4 clubhouses.
All right, let's move on.
The handover of the firebombing investigation to the State Crime Command's Raptor Squad demonstrated how seriously authorities viewed these developments. Created specifically to disrupt and dismantle outlaw motorcycle gangs, the Raptor Squad employs sophisticated surveillance techniques, intelligence networks, and strategic enforcement to monitor every move in the outlaw landscape. Their involvement signaled that this incident was being treated not as isolated property damage, but as part of a broader power struggle with regional implications. The establishment of a crime scene at the Portland Street Clubhouse triggered a methodical forensic response that would examine every aspect of the attack. Burn patterns would reveal points of origin and accelerant types, potentially connecting to specific individuals with access to particular materials. Vehicle remnants, despite extensive fire damage, retain identifiable components that create investigative pathways. Stolen vehicle histories, parts suppliers, modification patterns unique to specific mechanical shops. The reported presence of potential bullet casings introduced ballistic evidence that might link to firearms used in previous incidents. The Raptor Squad's involvement meant that this investigation would extend far beyond the immediate incident. Their mandate includes disrupting entire criminal networks, and the Hells Angels' expansion into Maitland territory had created exactly the kind of power shift that specialized units are designed to monitor and contain. But what they discovered during their investigation would reveal just how calculated and extensive the territorial takeover had been. Intelligence gathering during power transitions between outlaw motorcycle clubs requires resources beyond traditional criminal investigations. Automated license plate readers deployed around known gathering spots track movement patterns that might indicate preparation for retaliation or consolidation activities. Cell tower data, obtained with proper legal authority, helps map communication networks and physical movements before and after significant incidents. Social media monitoring provides insights into club dynamics not observable through traditional surveillance, as members often reveal information through routine online activities despite strict organizational prohibitions against such disclosures. The firebombing likely triggered immediate tactical responses beyond the visible emergency services deployment. Unmarked surveillance positions would be established around secondary locations, known members' residences, businesses associated with either club, and potential flashpoints for retaliatory violence. Informants throughout the region would receive urgent contact from their handlers, seeking immediate intelligence about planned responses from either organization. Interstate intelligence sharing would accelerate, as Victoria and Queensland authorities would be alerted to potential movement of reinforcements across state lines. Prosecutorial strategies following the incident would focus on specific criminal violations rather than targeting the power struggle itself. The firebombing created multiple charging possibilities: arson, malicious damage, endangering life, possibly attempted murder depending on circumstances, and various conspiracy charges if multiple perpetrators were involved. Reports of possible gunfire around the time of the incident could add weapons offenses if confirmed through forensic evidence or reliable witness testimony. Each charge creates leverage for potential cooperation from lower-ranking members facing significant prison time. Media circus and public perception.
11:30, and they're still working to identify who did it.
Claire Garcia was enjoying her Sunday morning when she heard
gunshots. There was about 6 of them. I don't know how severe it was. We heard it very close, but we didn't really get a chance to see what was going on.
The media's response to the Hells Angels takeover and subsequent firebombing followed predictable patterns of sensationalism over nuance. The Daily Telegraph's characterization of the Hells Angels' expansion as an aggressive power grab created narratives designed to capture public attention rather than explain the complex cultural dynamics actually driving the conflict. Headlines featuring terms like outlaw underworld, tensions boiling over, and brewing war satisfied audience expectations for dramatic content, while potentially oversimplifying the sophisticated territorial strategies at play. The visual elements of the story proved irresistible to news editors seeking compelling content. Descriptions of the gladiators' fortress-like compound with its medieval-style gates, the swimming pool emblazoned with their logo, and the dramatic black smoke billowing after the firebombing created imagery that captured audience attention regardless of the accompanying analysis. The contrast between the clubhouse's permanent, castle-like appearance and its ultimate destruction by fire provided symbolic narrative elements that news directors understood would resonate with viewers accustomed to simplified good versus evil storylines. But the most significant aspect of media coverage wasn't what it revealed about the conflict. It was how the coverage itself became part of the power struggle. When newspapers reported that other clubs were reaching out to the gladiators, offering support, such statements potentially influenced decision-making within the Hells Angels and other organizations, creating situations where reporting didn't simply document events, but potentially shaped them. The anonymous source's alternative explanation for the conflict's origins highlighted the gap between public perception and insider reality. While mainstream media painted a picture of territorial ambition and criminal enterprise expansion, the source claimed the entire situation stemmed from a handshake refusal that escalated through internal division rather than strategic planning. This discrepancy revealed how media narratives often reduce complex cultural conflicts to simplified power struggles, missing the intricate honor codes and personal relationships that frequently drive decisions in the outlaw world. Historical context appeared selectively in most coverage, focusing primarily on criminal allegations rather than the club's complete community integration over decades. The careful cataloging of police raids, weapons charges, and suspected drug activities created one-dimensional portraits that, while not inaccurate, lacked broader context about these organizations' complex relationships with their communities. The rare mentions of the gladiators' Jacka Bash boxing exhibitions and their bike, car, and tattoo shows at the Maitland Showgrounds represented acknowledgements of activities beyond alleged criminality. But these elements received minimal attention compared to the dramatic confrontation and destruction. The cyclical relationship between media coverage and club behavior created feedback loops that potentially escalated tensions. Organizations aware of being observed through news channels might modify their actions for strategic media impact, using visible displays of strength or unity to communicate messages to rivals, law enforcement, and their own membership. The Hells Angels reported bolstering of their presence in regional strongholds following media coverage of the gladiators' situation suggested awareness that public perception could influence the calculations of other clubs considering resistance or submission. The broader strategic picture.
I watch a lot of video, a lot of archive video, a lot of current video, and I don't recall seeing near one
The Hells Angels' successful takeover of Gladiators' territory represented more than a local power shift. It demonstrated a calculated expansion strategy that had been developing for years. Their website's prominent featuring of the Hunter Crew chapter, established in 2025, complementing their existing Steel City chapter in Newcastle, revealed systematic territorial acquisition moving inland from coastal strongholds. This expansion pattern follows globally tested methodologies refined through decades of international growth, establishing anchor chapters in major urban centers, then systematically building satellite operations in surrounding regions. The targeting of Maitland specifically showed sophisticated strategic analysis. Positioned as a gateway to the broader Hunter Valley, the location provides critical access points to transportation routes, industrial areas, and rural communities. By establishing control in Maitland, the Hells Angels gained influence over movement throughout the entire region, rather than merely acquiring another clubhouse. Their convoy approach, arriving with up to 50 members in a show of overwhelming force, demonstrated the resources they were willing to commit to regional dominance, signaling to other clubs that this territorial push represented serious long-term commitment rather than temporary opportunism. What makes this expansion particularly significant is its timing and targets. The Hells Angels didn't choose to challenge weak, recently formed clubs with limited community connections. They deliberately targeted one of Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle organisations, with 60 years of territorial claims and community integration. This bold move sent a clear message throughout the outlaw landscape. No club is too established, too respected, or too entrenched to be immune from takeover. Regional expansion by major international clubs typically follows recognizable patterns that local organizations struggle to counter effectively. Intelligence gathering and relationship building with local criminal networks precedes direct action by months or years. The identification of vulnerable clubs, often those weakened by police pressure, aging membership, or internal conflict, provides target selection criteria that maximize success probability while minimizing resource expenditure. The decisive show of force, ultimatum delivery, and swift territorial absorption represent final phases of processes that begin long before community members notice increased motorcycle traffic in their neighborhoods. The ripple effects throughout the Hunter region's criminal ecosystem extended far beyond the immediate participants. Local drug distribution networks, protection arrangements, and informal criminal relationships built over decades required renegotiation under new management. Smaller criminal organizations that had operated under Gladiators' protection or in cooperation with their territorial claims now faced uncertainty about continued operations. Business owners accustomed to dealing with familiar faces for protection or other services had to adapt to new relationships with Hells Angels representatives who brought different organizational cultures and expectations. The sustainability of the Hells Angels expansion depended partly on their ability to integrate acquired territory into their existing organizational structure without creating internal conflicts. Former Gladiators members who chose to patch over would enter probationary periods within the Hells Angels hierarchy, surrendering their previous status regardless of their experience or local knowledge. This integration process, while humiliating for the absorbed members, provides the conquering organization with valuable intelligence about local operations, business relationships, and potential threats that external observation couldn't reveal. Interclub alliance networks. The Daily Telegraph's report that other outlaw motorcycle clubs across New South Wales are believed to have reached out to the Gladiators, offering support, revealed the complex alliance dynamics that territorial expansion triggers throughout outlaw networks. These emerging alliances weren't built on friendship or shared values, but on pragmatic recognition of common threats. Every club observing the Gladiators' rapid collapse after 6 decades of independence faced uncomfortable questions about their own vulnerability to similar aggressive expansion by international organizations with superior resources. Interclub alliances in outlaw motorcycle culture operate through sophisticated protocols that balance cooperation with traditional independence. Senior club presidents make initial contact through trusted intermediaries, often using neutral third parties with connections to multiple organizations. Face-to-face meetings occur in carefully selected neutral territory, frequently with multiple chapters represented to demonstrate organizational commitment beyond individual leadership decisions. Support offers range from symbolic gestures of solidarity to practical assistance, manpower for security, temporary safe houses for displaced members, intelligence sharing about rivals' movements, or access to weapons and other resources. But the Hells Angels' response to these developing alliances revealed the calculating nature of their expansion strategy. Rather than backing down when faced with potential coalition opposition, reports suggested they were bolstering their presence in regional strongholds, bringing in additional members and resources to consolidate their territorial gains while preparing for broader resistance. The rarity of these alliance formations made them particularly significant indicators of perceived threat levels throughout the outlaw landscape. Clubs that had maintained rigid independence for decades, sometimes engaging in territorial disputes or business competition with each other, suddenly found common ground in opposing Hells Angels' expansion. This cooperation represented fundamental shifts in regional power calculations, as organizations that had previously viewed each other as rivals or competitors recognized that their individual survival might depend on collective resistance to external conquest. Law enforcement agencies monitored these developing alliances with particular concern, as historically separate or even hostile clubs beginning coordination created new operational possibilities for criminal activities. Intelligence networks that relied on inter-club rivalry to prevent large-scale criminal cooperation suddenly faced scenarios where traditional divisions might no longer provide security. The potential for coordinated drug distribution, weapons trafficking, or other criminal enterprises increased dramatically when clubs that had previously competed for territory or markets began sharing information and resources. The sustainability challenges facing these hastily formed alliances would ultimately determine whether the Hells Angels' expansion met organized resistance or continued unopposed. Historical analysis of outlaw motorcycle club coalitions reveals consistent patterns. They typically form in response to immediate external threats, but struggle to maintain cohesion once the crisis passes. Fundamental differences in club culture, historical grievances, and competing economic interests create internal friction that eventually dissolves cooperative arrangements, unless external pressure continues to justify the sacrifices required for unity. The psychology of conquest. The psychological warfare preceding the Hells Angels' physical takeover of Gladiators' territory operated on multiple levels that external observers rarely comprehend. The process began months before masked figures surrounded the Portland Street compound, involving subtle tests of resolve, recruitment attempts targeting individual members, and strategic appearances at events traditionally dominated by the target organization. These preliminary actions created atmospheres of inevitable change that weakened organizational cohesion before direct confrontation became necessary. The binary ultimatum, patch over or get out, represented psychological sophistication that eliminated middle ground options while forcing individual decisions under extreme pressure. This approach prevented the extended deliberation that might have allowed fractured clubs to reunify around opposition to conquest. Each member faced personal choices that had to be made immediately, without collective consultation, creating isolation and uncertainty that facilitated submission while identifying individuals who might require alternative handling. The humiliation rituals involved in patching over served strategic purposes beyond simple dominance demonstration. Former rivals forced to surrender their colors and accept subordinate status within conquering organizations experienced identity destruction that eliminated psychological foundations for future resistance, while creating loyalty bonds based on survival rather than brotherhood. The trauma associated with surrendering club patches extends beyond mere symbol exchange to fundamental identity destruction that affects individuals for years after territorial takeovers. Members who have worn their original colors for decades, building entire personal identities around club membership, face psychological crises comparable to forced exile from family structures. The patches aren't simply logos. They represent brotherhood bonds, shared sacrifices, and community recognition that can't be easily replaced with new organizational affiliations imposed through conquest rather than earned through voluntary association. Probationary periods imposed on former rivals who choose to patch over serve dual psychological functions. They maintain hierarchical distinctions that prevent absorbed members from achieving equal status with original Hells Angels members, while simultaneously testing their commitment to new organizational loyalties through tasks and humiliations designed to break down previous allegiances. This systematic psychological reconstruction ensures that former enemies become reliable subordinates rather than potential internal threats to organizational security. The public nature of the Hells Angels' territorial takeover created demonstration effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants. Other clubs throughout the region observed not just the practical mechanics of conquest, but the psychological techniques employed to achieve submission without prolonged violence that might attract excessive law enforcement attention. These lessons would influence decision-making in future territorial disputes, as organizations calculated whether resistance or preemptive submission offered better survival prospects when facing similar ultimatums. Environmental and economic consequences. The firebombing's environmental impact extended beyond immediate property damage to create regulatory complications that multiplied legal pressure on surviving club members. The Gladiators Clubhouse was reportedly positioned right on the edge of the Hunter River, meaning that firefighting water runoff, fuel spills from the burning vehicle, and toxic smoke could have contaminated local waterways. Environmental protection agencies would become involved alongside criminal investigators, potentially triggering federal violations with significant penalties that extend beyond those directly responsible for the arson to property owners and club officers bearing environmental remediation responsibilities. Economic disruption rippled throughout networks built over the Gladiators' 6-decade presence in Maitland. Local businesses that had operated under informal protection arrangements, mechanics shops that serviced club motorcycles, entertainment venues that hosted events, and suppliers who provided everything from food to security equipment, all faced uncertainty about continued relationships under Hells Angels management. These economic relationships represented substantial value that couldn't be easily quantified, but contributed significantly to both clubs' operational capabilities and community integration. The insurance implications alone created substantial financial pressure at precisely the moment when organizational resources faced maximum strain. Most insurance companies exclude coverage for outlaw motorcycle clubhouses or impose prohibitive premiums, meaning reconstruction required significant out-of-pocket expenditure when the club's income streams simultaneously faced disruption from territorial challenges. Property values in the surrounding area would reflect the increased criminal activity and law enforcement presence associated with territorial disputes. Residential neighbors who had adapted to the Gladiators' long-established presence now faced uncertainty about new occupants' behavior patterns and the potential for ongoing violence during territorial consolidation. Commercial properties near the clubhouse might experience difficulty attracting tenants or customers concerned about safety and law enforcement scrutiny. The broader economic implications extended to legitimate businesses owned by or associated with club members. Restaurants, construction companies, motorcycle dealerships, and other enterprises that employed club members or served their needs faced decisions about continued association with individuals whose organizational affiliations had changed or who faced uncertain legal situations. These economic pressures created additional incentives for former Gladiators members to accept Hells Angels affiliation rather than risk complete social and economic isolation. The final truth: what really started the war. As investigations continued and the smoke literally cleared from the destroyed fortress, the anonymous source's revelation provided the most shocking twist in the entire saga. The conflict that brought down Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle club, that triggered firebombings and territorial conquest, that mobilized specialized law enforcement units and reshaped regional criminal networks, all of it stemmed from a moment so simple that it seemed almost absurd: one member's refusal to shake hands. One Gladiators member refused to shake his hand twice and completely snubbed him. Those words contained the entire explanation for 60 years of history being erased in a matter of days. Not territorial ambition, not drug trade disputes, not strategic expansion planning, but a handshake refused twice at a party, creating a bit of tension that exploded into organizational collapse when the Hells Angels demanded the Gladiators deal with their own guy for disrespecting the Angels, or the Angels would step in themselves. The source was clear about the Hells Angels' role. The Angels didn't start the fire, but just saw an opening and took full advantage. This revelation reframed the entire narrative from aggressive expansion to opportunistic exploitation. The Hells Angels hadn't necessarily planned to destroy the Gladiators. They had simply recognized that the club's internal fracture over how to respond to their ultimatum created perfect conditions for territorial acquisition that might have taken years to achieve through other means. The speed of collapse. The rapidness with which the entire situation exploded revealed structural vulnerabilities that had likely been developing within the Gladiators for years. The internal division that split the club in half the club agreed to sort it out, but others refused and wanted to stand their ground, suggests that the handshake incident merely catalyzed pre-existing tensions about leadership, direction, and relationships with other organizations. A healthy, unified club might have weathered such a crisis through internal discipline and diplomatic resolution. Instead, the Gladiators' inability to reach consensus on handling the Hells Angels' ultimatum created the fatal weakness that their rivals recognized and exploited. When organizational leadership cannot make coherent decisions, when membership splits into opposing factions, when internal trust breaks down over fundamental questions of respect and response, these conditions create perfect opportunities for external conquest that experienced organizations like the Hells Angels immediately recognize and act upon. The sources claim that the club was shut down nationwide, all because of one member's actions, highlighted how individual behavior can doom entire organizations when internal cohesion is already compromised. The member who refused the handshake may not have intended to destroy his club, but his actions triggered a sequence of events that exposed and exacerbated structural problems that made organizational survival impossible once external pressure was applied. Aftermath and implications. The Hells Angels' successful exploitation of the Gladiators' internal crisis established new realities throughout Australia's outlaw motorcycle landscape. Their Hunter Crew chapter now operates from territory that had been controlled by rivals for 60 years, demonstrating to other clubs that even the most established organizations can fall rapidly when internal unity breaks down. This lesson will influence strategic thinking throughout the outlaw world as clubs reassess their own vulnerabilities and defensive preparations. Law enforcement agencies learned equally important lessons about how quickly regional power structures can shift when international organizations identify opportunities for expansion. The Raptor Squad and similar units must now monitor not just criminal activities, but internal dynamics within target organizations that might create exploitation opportunities for larger rivals. Intelligence gathering must extend beyond external threats to include assessment of organizational health and unity that affects vulnerability to conquest. The most profound implication may be for the concept of territorial permanence in outlaw motorcycle culture. If a 60-year-old club with deep community roots and fortress-like compound can be eliminated within days of internal disagreement, no organization can consider its territory permanently secure. This realization will likely accelerate alliance formations, defensive preparations, and strategic planning throughout Australia's outlaw landscape. The New Order.
West Coast shit, nigga,
The Hells Angels' expansion into Maitland represents more than territorial acquisition. It signals the beginning of a new era in Australian outlaw motorcycle politics. Their demonstrated ability to identify internal weaknesses, exploit organizational vulnerabilities, and execute rapid territorial conquest while avoiding prolonged violence that might attract excessive law enforcement attention provides a template that other international clubs will likely study and emulate. The systematic nature of their expansion, establishing the Hunter crew to complement their Newcastle Steel City chapter, suggests longer-term strategic planning that extends beyond opportunistic exploitation of the Gladiators' crisis. Regional control of transportation corridors, industrial zones, and rural communities creates operational advantages that justify the resources invested in territorial acquisition. The Hells Angels appear committed to permanent presence rather than temporary occupation, meaning their influence will likely continue expanding throughout the Hunter region and beyond. Other clubs observing these developments face difficult strategic choices. Resistance requires resources and unity that few organizations can maintain against international rivals with global support networks. Alliance formation offers potential collective defense, but requires sacrificing independence and sharing territory that clubs have traditionally guarded jealously. Preemptive submission might preserve some organizational autonomy while accepting subordinate status within expanding Hells Angels hierarchy. Lessons in power and vulnerability. The complete story of the Gladiators' collapse provides multiple lessons about power, vulnerability, and survival in criminal organizations that extend beyond outlaw motorcycle culture. Internal unity represents the foundation of organizational security. Without consensus on fundamental issues of leadership and response to external pressure, even the most established institutions become vulnerable to conquest. The handshake incident that started the crisis might seem trivial, but it exposed fractures that made the entire organization indefensible once serious pressure was applied. External pressure often exploits rather than creates internal weaknesses. The Hells Angels' ultimatum about handling the disrespectful member didn't cause the Gladiators' internal division. It revealed and exacerbated problems that had likely been building for years. Organizations that maintain internal cohesion can weather external challenges that destroy those whose foundations have been quietly eroding through neglect or internal conflict. The speed at which everything unraveled, from handshake refusal to organizational collapse in a matter of days, demonstrates how quickly stability can disappear when multiple crisis factors converge. The Gladiators had survived police raids, legal challenges, and rival competition for 6 decades, but they couldn't survive the combination of external pressure and internal division that the handshake incident triggered. The cost of disrespect. In the end, the entire saga comes down to respect, its importance in outlaw culture, the consequences of its absence, and the cascading effects when respect systems break down. The Gladiators member who refused to shake hands may have thought he was making a minor personal statement, but in a culture where respect is currency and disrespect demands response, his action started a chain reaction that consumed his entire organization. The Hells Angels' response demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both respect protocols and organizational psychology. Their ultimatum forced the Gladiators to choose between internal discipline and stubborn independence, knowing that either choice would weaken the organization. When the club split over this decision, the Hells Angels recognized the opportunity immediately and acted with decisive force that eliminated any possibility of recovery. The firebombing that destroyed the fortress-like clubhouse provided the final punctuation mark on this transformation. The building that had stood as a symbol of permanence and territorial control for 60 years was reduced to scorched ruins. Its swimming pool logo visible among the debris as a monument to how quickly power can shift in the outlaw world. The 63-year-old man found burned at the scene represented the human cost of these territorial struggles, though his exact role in the incident remained unclear as authorities continued their investigation. What happens when America's most violent biker gang turns on their own? The Hells Angels Sonoma County thought they were untouchable, until their own brutality destroyed them. We're talking about 4.5 hours of torture, cold-blooded murder, and crimes so shocking that even the FBI called them the most violent of the dozens convicted. Today we're diving into how this feared criminal empire fell apart from the inside, leading to life sentences that ended their reign of terror forever. You won't believe what these criminals did to each other. The organization and structure of a criminal empire. To understand how the Hells Angels Sonoma County became such a powerful and dangerous criminal organization, we need to first examine how they were structured and organized. This wasn't a loose collection of motorcycle enthusiasts who occasionally broke the law or got into bar fights. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with a clear hierarchy, strict rules that were enforced through violence, and a systematic approach to intimidation and criminal activity that allowed them to operate for decades without serious interference from law enforcement. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, also known as Hells Angels or HAMC, is a globally recognized outlaw motorcycle gang with chapters operating across multiple continents. They are considered one of the 14 dominant outlaw motorcycle gangs in the United States, a designation that reflects both their size and their capacity for systematic criminal activity. The Hells Angels are part of the infamous 1% clubs, a name that comes from their belief that they represent the 1% of bikers who, as they put it, don't follow the rules, don't follow laws, and don't answer to anybody. This 1% designation isn't just a casual nickname or marketing slogan. It represents a fundamental philosophy that places the organization above the law and outside the bounds of civilized society. Members are expected to reject mainstream values, to view law enforcement as enemies to be destroyed, and to use violence whenever necessary to protect the organization's interests and maintain their reputation for brutality throughout the criminal underworld. The organization is structured into chapters known as charters, which operate regionally under the broader Hells Angels umbrella. In the United States, these charters are divided into West Coast and East Coast regions, creating a network that spans the entire country and allows for coordination of criminal activities across thousands of miles. While each charter retains a level of autonomy by establishing its own set of rules and adapting to local criminal opportunities, they must still abide by the collective guidelines known as the Hells Angels World Rules. These world rules aren't suggestions or guidelines that members can choose to follow or ignore based on their personal preferences or circumstances. They are enforced through systematic violence, and breaking them can result in severe punishment up to and including death. The world rules create a unified criminal organization that can coordinate activities across multiple states and regions while maintaining the local flexibility necessary to adapt to different criminal opportunities and varying levels of law enforcement pressure. Becoming a member of a Hells Angels charter is not a quick or easy process that someone can complete on a whim. It typically involves a carefully structured progression from being a hangaround to prospect for at least a year before attaining the status of a full-patch member. Each stage of this progression involves increasingly serious criminal activities and repeated demonstrations of loyalty to the organization, ensuring that only the most committed and violent individuals join the ranks of full members. The hangaround stage is essentially a probationary period where individuals spend time with the club and prove their worthiness to become prospects. During this time, they're expected to show their commitment to the criminal lifestyle and their willingness to put the organization's interests above their own personal safety, legal concerns, or family relationships. Hangarounds have no official status within the organization and can be dismissed at any time without explanation or appeal. Prospects face much more serious requirements and must prove their loyalty through criminal activities that often include violence against rival gang members, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, witness intimidation, and other serious crimes that carry lengthy prison sentences. The prospect period is designed to test an individual's commitment to the criminal enterprise and their willingness to risk imprisonment or death for the organization. Only after successfully completing this dangerous apprenticeship can someone become a full-patch member with the right to wear the organization's colors and participate in its decision-making processes. Full-patch members are distinguished by the iconic three-piece patch on their vests, featuring the club's name, Hells Angels, at the top rocker. The center patch displays the Death Head logo, a skull with its mouth stitched shut. which has become one of the most recognizable symbols of organized crime in the world. Below the death head is the bottom rocker, indicating the state or region the member is from. Only full patch members are allowed to wear anything that displays the Hells Angels name or the death head logo, and protecting these symbols is considered a sacred duty that justifies any level of violence. Members can also earn additional tags that they wear on the front of their vest, with the most notorious being the Filthy Few tag. Members earn this designation by committing acts of violence in support of the club, including violence towards rival outlaw motorcycle gangs, members deemed to have disrespected fellow Hells Angels, those kicked out of the club in bad standing, and anyone who disrespects the patch in public. The Filthy Few patch serves as both a badge of honor within the organization and a warning to outsiders about that person's capacity for extreme violence. Each charter adheres to a standardized leadership structure that provides clear chains of command and responsibility, while ensuring that criminal activities can be coordinated effectively. This structure typically consists of roles such as president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and sergeant-at-arms. The president serves as the head of the charter and makes the final decisions on major criminal activities, while also serving as the primary representative to other charters and the national organization. The sergeant-at-arms acts as the enforcer, responsible for using violence when necessary to maintain respect for the charter and discipline charter members who fail to follow both charter-specific and world rules. Chapters hold mandatory weekly meetings referred to as church, where members discuss charter business and vote on charter issues ranging from criminal activities to internal discipline matters. These meetings operate on a one-man, one-vote principle, with most decisions made within the chapter being determined collectively through democratic processes. However, this democratic facade masks the reality that the most violent and influential members typically control the agenda and outcomes of these votes. Prospects are not allowed to participate in church meetings, demonstrating their lower status within the organization's rigid hierarchy. Instead, they are expected to provide security during these meetings, particularly by keeping an eye out for rival outlaw motorcycle gangs and law enforcement surveillance. This arrangement serves multiple purposes. It keeps sensitive criminal discussions away from newer members who might not be completely trustworthy, while also providing free security for the organization's leadership during their most vulnerable moments. During church meetings, it was very common for all Hells Angels Sonoma County members to share information about each other's criminal cases and potential criminal liabilities. The progress of members' criminal cases was closely monitored by the organization's leadership, who used this information to coordinate witness intimidation, plan retaliation against law enforcement, and ensure that members remained loyal even when facing serious criminal charges that could result in lengthy prison sentences. Key players in the criminal enterprise. Understanding the complete downfall of the Hells Angels, Sonoma County requires a detailed examination of the key individuals who built, led, and ultimately destroyed this violent criminal organization. These weren't just motorcycle enthusiasts who occasionally broke the law or got into fights at local bars. They were sophisticated criminals who built their reputations on systematic violence, calculated intimidation, and the ruthless exploitation of others. Their personalities, relationships, and criminal activities shaped the organization's culture and ultimately determined its fate. At the absolute center of the entire criminal enterprise stood Raymond Folks, known to everyone in the organization as Ray Ray. Raymond held the most important leadership positions within the Hells Angels Sonoma County, serving with distinction as both former president and former sergeant-at-arms. His influence extended far beyond any official title or position, making him the most respected, feared, and powerful figure in the organization's entire history. Raymond was president of the Hells Angels Sonoma County, at least until 2008, when he went to prison on federal charges, but his incarceration did nothing to diminish his power or influence within the organization. Even from behind bars, Raymond continued to call the shots and maintain significant influence within the chapter, demonstrating the organization's ability to continue criminal operations even when key leaders were imprisoned. Despite his incarceration, Raymond received moral and financial support from Hells Angels Sonoma County during his imprisonment, showing the organization's commitment to maintaining loyalty even when members were behind bars. Raymond's motorcycle was still proudly displayed at the clubhouse during his incarceration, like a shrine to his authority, and he continued to actively participate in club activities by joining meetings from prison through smuggled cell phones and other communications methods. Raymond had built a reputation for being a badass, a rock star, and Mr. Hell's Angel among members throughout the organization and beyond. One member emphasized that nobody controlled Raymond, explaining that he had the highest level of respect and was highly admired throughout the criminal network. He was regarded as somebody extremely powerful within the club, even during his time behind bars, demonstrating that respect in the organization was based on capacity for violence and criminal achievement, rather than current freedom or legal status. The extent of Raymond's power and influence was captured perfectly in one member's statement. Whatever Ray needed, Ray got. And if that's because he was a member of Sonoma County or just a Hell's Angel in general, that's Ray, and Ray gets what he wants. This wasn't just about personal charisma or individual relationships, but about Raymond's proven willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his goals and his track record of success in building the organization's power and reputation throughout the criminal underworld. Notably, Raymond's presence elevated the status of Hell's Angels Sonoma County significantly because he was known and respected among other Hell's Angels chapters throughout the country. His reputation gave the local chapter access to criminal opportunities, protection, and resources that they wouldn't have had otherwise, making him invaluable to the organization's continued success and expansion into new criminal markets. Russell Ott, known throughout the organization by the moniker Chief, represented the organizational memory and founding vision of the criminal enterprise. As a founding member of Hell's Angels Sonoma County and its president for 15 years before Raymond Folks took over, Russell had been present for the organization's entire transformation from a simple motorcycle club into a sophisticated criminal organization capable of coordinating complex illegal activities across multiple states and regions. Russell was described as one of the most active Hell's Angels ever, often spending extensive periods of time at the Hell's Angels Sonoma County Clubhouse and even living there during certain periods when the organization faced external threats or needed constant coordination of criminal activities. This constant presence made him a central figure in the organization's day-to-day operations and criminal planning, while his deep knowledge of the organization's history, rules, and relationships made him an invaluable resource for newer members and a key figure in maintaining the organization's criminal traditions and institutional memory. Christopher Ranieri, a former president of the Boston Hells Angels chapter, maintained extraordinarily strong ties with both the Hells Angels Sonoma County and Fresno chapters, creating a criminal network that spanned the entire continent and allowed for coordination of complex criminal activities across thousands of miles. His influence and connections were demonstrated by the celebrations that were held for Christopher when he visited both West Coast clubhouses, showing the respect and fear he commanded throughout the organization. The depth of Christopher's connection to the West Coast chapters was revealed through his personal relationships with their members and his emotional investment in their success. The Hells Angels Sonoma County Sergeant-at-Arms, Russell Lyles, visited Christopher frequently and even considered naming his son after him, showing how personal relationships and criminal business interests intersected within the organization. Christopher wore a Sonoma tag and had a Sonoma County Death's Head tattoo on his forearm, demonstrating his deep emotional and criminal investment in the West Coast operations. These personal connections weren't just about friendship or mutual respect between individuals who happened to share similar interests. They were the foundation of criminal conspiracies that would span thousands of miles and involve coordination between different criminal organizations, ultimately bringing federal law enforcement into the picture and dramatically increasing the potential penalties for everyone involved in the criminal enterprise. Jonathan Nelson, the most recent president of Hells Angels Sonoma County, was highly respected throughout the organization, but his respect was based on fear rather than admiration or genuine leadership qualities. He often used violence to address perceived slights against himself and the Hells Angels Sonoma County, creating a climate of terror that extended far beyond the organization to affect the broader community and innocent civilians who had no connection to criminal activities. Jonathan had developed significant respect and a close personal friendship with Christopher Ranieri, giving him access to the East Coast criminal network and elevating his status within the broader Hells Angels organization. This relationship was crucial to Jonathan's authority within the organization because it demonstrated his connections to powerful figures in the national criminal network and his ability to coordinate activities across multiple states and regions. Jonathan's leadership style was characterized by extreme sensitivity about his status and authority within the organization. He couldn't tolerate any challenge to his position, whether real or perceived, and he was quick to respond with extreme violence to any perceived disrespect or challenge to his authority. This volatile and dangerous personality made him both an effective enforcer of the organization's criminal activities and a liability who attracted unwanted law enforcement attention through his excessive and poorly controlled use of violence. Brian Wendt, former president of the Hells Angels Fresno chapter and the Hells Angels West Coast Sergeant-at-Arms, was known throughout the criminal network for using extreme violence in carrying out his role as regional enforcer and coordinator of criminal activities. Brian had developed a close personal bond with Jonathan Nelson that created a powerful partnership between the Sonoma County and Fresno chapters, facilitating major criminal enterprises including drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and ultimately murder. Brian was present at the Hells Angels Sonoma County Clubhouse frequently, demonstrating how the organization's leadership moved freely between different chapters to coordinate their criminal activities and maintain unified control over their territory and criminal operations. His role as West Coast Sergeant-at-Arms made him one of the most feared and powerful enforcers in the entire organization, responsible for maintaining discipline and coordinating violent activities throughout the western United States. Joel Silver was a member of Hells Angels Sonoma County, who had built a reputation as a bully, causing serious problems at the Sonoma County, Fresno, and New Hampshire clubhouses through his inability to control his violent impulses and respect the organization's hierarchy. Joel's behavior was creating tensions not just within his own chapter, but throughout the broader Hells Angels network, threatening the carefully maintained relationships that were crucial for the organization's criminal success. The culture of violence and systematic intimidation. The Hells Angels Sonoma County didn't simply use violence as one tool among many for achieving their criminal goals and maintaining their position in the underworld. They built their entire organizational identity and operational philosophy around the systematic, calculated use of violence and intimidation. This culture of brutality wasn't an accident, a side effect of their criminal activities, or something that developed gradually over time. It was a deliberately cultivated and carefully maintained system that served multiple crucial purposes within their criminal enterprise and defined their reputation throughout the criminal underworld. Violence within the organization served as the ultimate form of communication and problem-solving, transcending language barriers and cultural differences within their diverse membership, while ensuring that everyone understood the consequences of crossing the organization or challenging its authority. When words failed, when negotiations broke down, or when the organization's authority was challenged by internal dissent or external threats, violence provided a clear, immediate, and universally understood solution that left no room for misinterpretation or future challenges to the organization's power structure. This wasn't random brutality, uncontrolled aggression, or violence committed in the heat of passion by individuals who had lost their tempers. It was calculated violence designed to send specific messages to specific audiences while achieving concrete criminal objectives and maintaining the organization's reputation for absolute ruthlessness. Internal violence was used to maintain strict discipline and ensure that all members understood the severe consequences of disloyalty, disobedience, or any challenge to the organization's hierarchy and authority structure. The organization's commitment to violence was so complete and fundamental that it became the primary measure of a member's worth, status, and potential for advancement within the criminal enterprise. Members who were willing to commit acts of violence in support of the club could earn the prestigious Filthy Few tag, which served simultaneously as a badge of honor within the organization and a clear warning to outsiders about that person's capacity for brutal, unrestrained violence against anyone who crossed them. This system created powerful incentives for members to actively seek out opportunities for violence, knowing that their willingness to hurt, maim, or kill others would be rewarded with higher status, greater respect from their criminal associates, better criminal opportunities, and increased protection from the organization. The Filthy Few designation wasn't just about recognizing past violence, but about demonstrating ongoing commitment to using brutality whenever the organization demanded it, regardless of the personal risks or legal consequences. Rival outlaw motorcycle gangs were viewed as natural enemies by Hell's Angels members, not competitors in the same criminal markets or even adversaries in a traditional sense, but as threats to be systematically eliminated through coordinated campaigns of violence and intimidation. Members were expected to attack enemies on sight whenever they encountered them, regardless of the circumstances, location, or potential witnesses who might observe the violence. Government witness Joseph Hardesty revealed during his testimony that he was recruited by the Hell's Angels for what they called big game hunting and small game hunting, terminology that revealed how completely the organization had dehumanized their enemies and reduced fellow human beings to prey to be systematically hunted and eliminated. This referred to the task of hunting and killing the Mongols, which they considered big game, and hunting and killing the Vagos, which they considered small game. This hunting metaphor wasn't just casual language or dark humor used by criminals to describe their activities, but reflected a fundamental worldview that divided humanity into predators and prey, with the Hell's Angels viewing themselves as apex predators, with the natural right and responsibility to eliminate anyone who challenged their dominance in the criminal ecosystem. Joseph recounted a chilling incident that demonstrated how completely the organization had normalized extreme violence and conditioned its members to commit potentially lethal acts without hesitation or moral consideration. He was riding with Hell's Angels Sonoma County members, including Joel Silver and Russell Ott, when he spotted an individual whom he believed to be a member of a rival outlaw motorcycle gang based solely on appearance and location. Without any attempt to verify the person's identity, determine their intentions, or consider the potential legal consequences of his actions, Joseph immediately took out his gun and fired multiple shots in the person's direction, potentially committing attempted murder based solely on the belief that the target was associated with a rival organization. This hair-trigger response to perceived enemies showed how the organization had conditioned its members to view lethal violence not as a last resort to be used only when absolutely necessary, but as the appropriate first response to any potential threat or challenge. Following the shooting, rather than being concerned about this random act of potentially lethal violence or worried about the legal consequences of attempted murder in a public location, the other Hell's Angels Sonoma County members present commended Joseph's actions and praised him for his willingness to use violence, hailing him as a real Hell's Angel. This response revealed how completely the organization's value system had been inverted from mainstream society, where violence against perceived enemies wasn't just acceptable, but was actively celebrated and used as a primary measure of a member's worth and commitment to the criminal enterprise. After a Mongols member killed the president of the San Francisco Hell's Angels, in what the organization viewed as an unacceptable challenge to their authority and dominance, Hell's Angels Sonoma County members were instructed to actively look out for Mongols throughout their territory and attack them on sight whenever they were encountered, regardless of the circumstances or potential consequences. This directive wasn't just a general call for increased vigilance or a suggestion that members should be prepared to defend themselves if attacked, but a systematic campaign of violence designed to terrorize an entire rival organization through coordinated attacks. Failure to comply with this directive resulted in immediate and severe loss of status within the Hell's Angels organization, demonstrating how seriously the leadership took their campaign of systematic violence against rival groups. For example, a full-patch Hell's Angels Sonoma County member failed to report seeing a Mongol license plate within what the organization considered to be Hell's Angels territory, and was immediately demoted to prospect status as punishment for this failure to participate in the organization's violent activities. This harsh punishment for what might seem like a relatively minor oversight demonstrated how seriously the organization took their campaign of violence and how any failure to actively participate in violent activities against rival groups was considered a fundamental betrayal of the organization's core values and mission. The brutal assault of Troy Conte.
Troy Conte, a former member of Hell's Angels Sonoma County, was sleeping with Raymond Folks' girlfriend. In November 2016, after Raymond found out about the affair, Troy received a text message stating that all Hell's Angels Sonoma County members needed to be at the clubhouse for a meeting. Members of the club were already there, and 20 minutes after Troy got there, Raymond arrived and confronted him about the affair. Raymond struck Troy in the face. Despite attempts to leave, Troy was dragged back inside by Raymond and Russell out, and the assault continued. Eventually, the assault stopped for a bit so that Hell's Angels Sonoma County members could vote on Troy's membership within the club. After they voted to revoke his membership, the beating continued. Troy endured a brutal beating that involved being hit with a baseball bat, being bullwhipped and pistol whipped over the course of 4.5 hours. Troy was also held down so Raymond could run a tattoo gun across his face. Raymond left amidst the assault and came back later. Troy said that the worst part of the assault was when Jonathan Nelson pistol whipped him in the face. The night Troy was brutally assaulted and removed from Hell's Angels Sonoma County, Raymond left amidst the assault in order to sexually assault Troy's wife Michelle in a disturbing act of intimidation. Amid the violence at the clubhouse, Raymond called Michelle and told her to come to the clubhouse. Once she arrived, Raymond took her to a secluded area. He told her if she doesn't do what he says, Troy is going to get worse than what he already has, and if she says anything to anybody, then he'll come after her. Raymond then forced Michelle to perform fellatio on him before she returned home. Following this, Raymond returned to the clubhouse to continue the assault on Troy, callously recounting what he did to Michelle. Prior to Troy's return home, Raymond went to their house and attempted to assault Michelle again in their bed. However, Hell's Angels Sonoma County member Josh Johnson, who was bringing Troy home after the assault at the clubhouse, arrived at the house before Raymond could follow through with the sexual assault and persuaded Raymond to leave. Michelle then rushed her injured husband to the hospital. After the brutal assault, Troy required an overnight stay in the hospital due to the severity of his injuries. Medical records described Troy as a risk for sudden clinical deterioration and life-threatening injuries. Medical records showed that he suffered facial fractures, including those affecting the orbital walls of his left eye. He also needed plastic surgery to remove the tattoos from his forehead after Raymond ran a tattoo gun over his face. Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond. Despite usually avoiding dealing with law enforcement, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police, a typically forbidden thing to do by a member or associate of the Hell's Angels. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest.
The savage, hours-long assault of Troy Conte represented the Hell's Angels Sonoma County's culture of systematic violence at its most personal, calculated, and brutal. This wasn't just another act of criminal violence, a spontaneous fight between individuals with personal grievances, or even a typical example of gang brutality. This was a carefully orchestrated torture session designed to punish what the organization considered the ultimate betrayal, while simultaneously demonstrating their absolute power over anyone who dared to cross them or challenge their authority. The 4.5-hour ordeal that Troy endured would become one of the most compelling and horrifying pieces of evidence in the federal prosecution that would ultimately destroy the entire criminal organization, providing prosecutors with detailed testimony about the organization's methods, leadership structure, and complete willingness to use extreme torture to maintain control and discipline among their members and associates. Troy Conte, a former member of Hell's Angels Sonoma County, who had once been trusted with the organization's secrets and included in their criminal activities, was discovered to be sleeping with Raymond Folks' girlfriend. In the violent and rigidly hierarchical world of the Hell's Angels, this wasn't just a personal matter between individuals or a private relationship issue that could be resolved through discussion, negotiation, or mutual agreement between the parties involved. The affair represented a direct challenge to Raymond's authority, status, and reputation within the organization, an insult that demanded not just punishment, but a brutal public demonstration of power that would serve as a clear warning to anyone else who might consider crossing the organization's leadership or challenging the established hierarchy. The discovery of this betrayal set in motion a series of events that would reveal the cold, calculated nature of the organization's approach to internal discipline and their sophisticated understanding of psychological torture techniques. In November 2016, after Raymond discovered the affair and had sufficient time to plan his response and coordinate with other members of the organization's leadership, Troy received what appeared to be a routine text message that gave no indication of the horror that awaited him. The message stated that all Hells Angels Sonoma County members needed to be at the clubhouse for a mandatory meeting, the kind of gathering that happened regularly for organizational business and criminal planning purposes. For Troy, who apparently had no idea that his affair had been discovered or that he was walking into a carefully planned trap designed to destroy him, this seemed like just another routine gathering of the organization's membership. He had no way of knowing that this seemingly innocuous message was actually his death warrant, summoning him to face judgment and punishment for his betrayal in front of the entire organization. When Troy arrived at the clubhouse, he walked directly into a carefully orchestrated and meticulously planned trap that had been designed to maximize his suffering while demonstrating the organization's power to other members. Other members of the club were already gathered and waiting, fully aware of what was about to happen and eager to witness what they knew would be a violent demonstration of the organization's capacity for brutality and the severe consequences of crossing their leadership. Members of the club were already there, and 20 minutes after Troy arrived, giving him just enough time to realize that something was seriously wrong and to experience the growing fear and anxiety that would enhance his psychological suffering, Raymond arrived and immediately confronted him about the affair. There was no discussion, no opportunity for explanation, apology, or negotiation of any kind. Without any warning or preamble, Raymond struck Troy in the face with tremendous force, beginning what would become one of the most savage and prolonged displays of organized violence in the organization's brutal history. Despite desperate attempts to leave the clubhouse and escape the violence that was clearly planned for him, Troy was dragged back inside by Raymond and Russell Ott, demonstrating that this wasn't just Raymond's personal revenge, but a coordinated organizational effort supported by other leaders of the criminal enterprise. The participation of multiple senior members in preventing Troy's escape showed that this torture session had the official sanction and active support of the organization's leadership. Eventually, the ongoing physical assault was temporarily suspended so that Hells Angels Sonoma County members could hold a formal vote on Troy's membership within the club, creating a grotesque parody of democratic decision-making that overlaid the systematic torture and added an additional layer of psychological trauma to the physical violence. This wasn't just about inflicting physical pain and injury on Troy, but about maximizing his psychological suffering through a carefully orchestrated process of humiliation and degradation. After they voted to revoke his membership, permanently expelling him from the organization and stripping him of any protection or consideration he might have expected from his former associates, the beating continued with renewed intensity and systematic brutality. Troy endured a brutal beating that involved being hit with a baseball bat, being bull-whipped with various implements, and being pistol-whipped by multiple members over the course of 4.5 hours of continuous violence. Troy was also held down so Raymond could run a tattoo gun across his face, permanently marking him as a traitor and ensuring that he would carry the physical scars of this experience for the rest of his life. This act of forced tattooing revealed the psychological sophistication of the organization's torture methods, which were designed to inflict not just immediate physical pain, but lasting humiliation, trauma, and permanent disfigurement that would serve as a constant reminder of what happened to people who crossed the organization. During the assault, Raymond left amidst the torture and came back later, a detail that would prove crucial to understanding the full scope of the organization's campaign of violence and intimidation against Troy and his family. Troy said that the worst part of the assault was when Jonathan Nelson, the organization's current president, pistol-whipped him in the face, demonstrating how the organization's highest-ranking leader felt the need to participate directly and personally in the violence. After the brutal assault, Troy required an overnight stay in the hospital due to the severity of his injuries, with medical records describing him as a risk for sudden clinical deterioration and life-threatening injuries. Medical records showed that he suffered facial fractures, including those affecting the orbital walls of his left eye, and he needed plastic surgery to remove the tattoos from his forehead after Raymond ran a tattoo gun over his face. Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident, showing the permanent damage caused by the organization's systematic torture. The sexual assault and intimidation of Michelle.
Even to this day, Troy still has vision issues stemming from the incident. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond. Despite usually avoiding dealing with law enforcement, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police, a typically forbidden thing to do by a member or associate of the Hells Angels. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest.
While Troy Conti endured systematic torture and brutalization at the clubhouse, his wife Michelle became the victim of a calculated sexual assault that demonstrated the Hells Angels Sonoma County's willingness to target completely innocent family members as part of their comprehensive campaign of violence and intimidation. This aspect of the organization's criminal activities revealed their understanding that psychological warfare could be just as effective as physical violence in destroying their enemies and maintaining control over anyone who might challenge their authority. The night Troy was brutally assaulted and removed from Hells Angels Sonoma County, Raymond left amidst the assault in order to sexually assault Troy's wife Michelle in a disturbing act of intimidation that was designed to maximize Troy's psychological suffering while demonstrating the organization's complete power over anyone who crossed them. This wasn't a spontaneous act of sexual violence or an opportunistic crime committed in the heat of the moment, but a calculated and strategic decision designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on the organization's primary target. Amid the ongoing violence at the clubhouse, with multiple members participating in Troy's systematic torture, Raymond made the deliberate decision to temporarily abandon the physical assault and focus his attention on Troy's wife. He called Michelle and told her to come to the clubhouse, using her natural concern for her husband's safety as a weapon that could be turned against both of them. Michelle, having no way of knowing what Raymond intended to do to her and probably being primarily concerned about Troy's safety and well-being after receiving such an ominous summons, felt compelled to respond to this demand from such a powerful and feared figure within the organization. Her decision to comply with Raymond's order showed how the organization exploited people's love and concern for family members as tools that could be used to facilitate additional crimes. Once she arrived at the clubhouse, Raymond took her to a secluded area away from the ongoing assault, showing his careful planning and understanding that what he was about to do needed to be conducted away from potential witnesses who might later testify about his specific actions. This level of premeditation and tactical thinking demonstrates that the sexual assault wasn't an impulsive act, driven by opportunity or sexual desire, but a deliberate crime designed to achieve specific objectives within the organization's broader campaign of intimidation and punishment. Raymond told Michelle that if she didn't do what he said, Troy was going to get worse than what he already had, and if she said anything to anybody about what happened, then he would come after her personally. These threats created a psychologically devastating situation where Michelle had no good options available to her and was forced to choose between terrible alternatives that would result in suffering regardless of her decision. She could either submit to Raymond's sexual demands, knowing that compliance would spare Troy additional suffering, but would subject her to sexual assault and ongoing trauma, or she could resist and fight back, knowing that her defiance would likely result in even more brutal treatment for her husband, who was already being systematically tortured by multiple attackers in the next room. Raymond then forced Michelle to perform fellatio on him before she returned home, committing a sexual assault that served multiple purposes within the organization's criminal strategy and demonstrated his complete contempt for both his victims and basic human decency. The assault was designed not just to satisfy Raymond's personal sexual desires, but to demonstrate his complete power over Troy and his family, showing that he could take anything he wanted from them, including his wife's dignity and bodily autonomy. The sexual nature of the assault added an additional layer of humiliation, trauma, and psychological damage that would affect both Michelle and Troy for the rest of their lives, creating lasting emotional scars that would persist long after the physical wounds had healed. Raymond understood that sexual assault carries a particular stigma and creates specific forms of trauma that would make it even more difficult for the victims to report the crime or discuss it with others, potentially keeping his actions hidden while maximizing the long-term psychological damage to both targets. Following this sexual assault, Raymond returned to the clubhouse to continue the assault on Troy, callously recounting what he had done to Michelle in front of the other members who were participating in or witnessing the ongoing torture session. This wasn't just bragging about a criminal act or sharing details of his sexual conquest with his criminal associates, but a calculated demonstration to the other members of the organization that Raymond had the power, authority, and complete lack of moral restraints necessary to commit any crime he wanted against their enemies. Prior to Troy's return home from the hospital, Raymond went to their house and attempted to assault Michelle again in their bed, showing his belief that he could commit any crime he wanted against Troy's family without facing any consequences from law enforcement or retaliation from his victims. However, Hells Angels Sonoma County member Josh Johnson, who was bringing Troy home after the assault at the clubhouse, arrived at the house before Raymond could follow through with the second sexual assault and persuaded Raymond to leave. The day following the assault, Michelle disclosed to her husband that she had been sexually assaulted by Raymond, adding another devastating layer of trauma to an already horrific situation and ensuring that Troy would have to live with the knowledge that his personal betrayal had resulted in his wife being victimized by the same man who had tortured him. Despite usually avoiding any contact with law enforcement, which was typically a forbidden thing to do for any member or associate of the Hells Angels, Troy encouraged Michelle to report the assault to the police. Michelle followed through with Troy's advice, leading to Raymond's subsequent arrest and marking the beginning of the organization's downfall as their code of silence was finally broken. The murder of Joel Silva and its execution.
Joel Silva held the position of sergeant-at-arms in the club and had been a member for 5 years when he met his tragic end. During June 2014, Joel attended the annual Laconia Motorcycle Week in New Hampshire alongside fellow members Joseph Hardesty, as well as charter members Brian Wendt, Robbie Huff, and Tio Bueno from the Fresno chapter. While at the event, Joel and Joseph spent time at the Laconia Charter Clubhouse, where they were reckless and causing problems. Joseph stated that they were using meth, tearing the clubhouse apart, terrorizing the prospects, and picking on all the East Coast members. Joel engaged in this type of behavior very often, which was causing tensions between him and the Hells Angels. At one point, a conflict arose between Joel and Boston Charter member Sweeney, who was the right-hand man to Boston Charter President Christopher Rainieri. Sweeney was upset with Joel for moving marijuana across the country, while Joel was upset and jealous that Sweeney had taken a Hells Angels chain from him and given it to Joseph.
The calculated, cold-blooded murder of Joel Silva represented the ultimate expression of the Hells Angels Sonoma County's willingness to eliminate anyone they viewed as a threat to their criminal enterprise, even when that threat came from within their own ranks and involved killing someone they had once considered a brother. This wasn't a crime of passion, a spontaneous act of violence during a heated argument, or the result of a personal dispute between individual members with long-standing grievances. Joel Silva held the position of sergeant-at-arms in the club and had been a member for 5 years when he met his tragic end, a length of service that should have earned him respect and protection from his criminal associates. As someone responsible for internal discipline and enforcement within the organization, Joel was expected to be one of the most trusted and valued figures within the chapter's hierarchy and power structure. However, over the course of his membership, Joel had developed a reputation as an out-of-control bully whose violent behavior was creating serious problems not just within his own chapter, but throughout the broader Hells Angels network, and threatening the organization's carefully maintained relationships with allied criminal groups. Joel was known for his reputation as a bully, causing problems at the Sonoma County, Fresno, and New Hampshire clubhouses through his inability to control his violent impulses or respect the organization's established hierarchy and rules. During June 2014, Joel attended the annual Laconia Motorcycle Week in New Hampshire alongside fellow members Joseph Hardesty, as well as charter members Brian Wendt, Robbie Huff, and Tio Bueno from the allied Fresno chapter. What should have been an opportunity to strengthen relationships with East Coast chapters and conduct productive criminal business instead became a complete disaster that would ultimately mark Joel for death and set in motion the events that would lead to his murder. While at the event, Joel and Joseph spent considerable time at the Laconia Charter Clubhouse, where their behavior was so reckless and disruptive that it shocked even other members of the notoriously violent organization and created serious tensions with their East Coast allies. Joseph later testified that they were using methamphetamine extensively, which contributed to their complete loss of control and inappropriate behavior throughout the event. They spent their time tearing the clubhouse apart, terrorizing the prospects who were supposed to be protected and guided by full members, and picking on all the East Coast members who were their hosts and should have been treated with respect and courtesy. Joel engaged in this type of behavior very often, which was causing ongoing tensions between him and the broader Hells Angels organization and threatening the stability of the entire criminal network. At one point during the Laconia event, a serious conflict arose between Joel and Boston Charter member Sweeney, who served as the right-hand man to Boston Charter President Christopher Ranieri, and was therefore one of the most powerful and influential figures in the entire East Coast criminal network. This confrontation involved both business and personal elements that revealed the complex dynamics within the criminal organization and showed how individual grievances could escalate into existential threats to the entire network. Sweeney was upset with Joel for moving marijuana across the country without proper authorization from the appropriate leadership, a serious violation of the organization's territorial rules and chain of command that could have attracted federal law enforcement attention and interfered with other members' established drug trafficking operations. Meanwhile, Joel was angry and jealous that Sweeney had taken a Hells Angels chain from him and given it to Joseph, an action that Joel viewed as a personal insult and direct challenge to his status within the organization. The situation escalated dramatically when Joel directly threatened Sweeney and openly stated that he wanted to kill him, actively seeking help from Joseph and Robbie in carrying out this murder. This threat was recognized immediately as a significant problem that could destroy the entire organization through internal warfare. Joseph tried to talk Joel out of this catastrophic course of action, telling him directly that you can't kill other Hells Angels, and pointing out that he was talking about killing a member over a chain, just because your feelings are hurt. When the news of Joel's threat eventually reached Brian Wendt, he was very upset and immediately told Christopher about the situation, setting in motion the chain of events that would lead to Joel's death. The Fresno Charter gave Joseph an ultimatum, telling him that he would have to choose between supporting Joel or aligning himself with the more powerful Fresno Charter. You're going to stay here with Joel, or you're coming with us. Pick a side. Joseph ultimately opted to align himself with the Fresno Charter, recognizing that they were more powerful and that staying with Joel would likely result in his own death. As Joseph later explained, if I stayed with Joel, that meant I was going to face the same fate as him. He also believed that Joel had made a big mistake, and it wasn't the safe choice to stay with him, showing how members constantly calculated their survival based on shifting power dynamics within the organization. Subsequently, Joseph went with the Fresno Charter to Christopher's home in Boston, where Christopher and Brian had a private discussion regarding Joel's threat and the appropriate response to this challenge to their authority. Upon rejoining the group after their confidential meeting, Christopher and Brian announced their decision with chilling simplicity. Joel had to go. This wasn't an emotional decision made in the heat of anger, but a calculated business decision made by the organization's most powerful leaders after careful consideration of the threat Joel represented. The following day, at Joseph's home in Antioch, California, a formal planning meeting took place among Hells Angels Sonoma County, President Jonathan, Brian, and several members of the Fresno Charter to discuss the specifics of killing Joel and coordinate the logistics of the murder. After thorough discussion, they ultimately decided to proceed with the plan to eliminate Joel permanently. Their reasoning revealed the cold, businesslike approach the organization took to internal violence and the elimination of problematic members. They decided to kill Joel because he was causing too much problems, beating too many friends up. The threat to Sweeney's life, he was causing too much drama within different charters. This wasn't about justice, honor, or protecting innocent people, but about eliminating a disruptive employee who was interfering with the smooth operation of their criminal business. Jonathan also had personal motivations for supporting Joel's murder that revealed additional layers of the organization's internal politics and power struggles. Jonathan perceived that Joel was challenging his status as Hells Angels Sonoma County president, dating back to a confrontation in February 2013 when Joel had struck Jonathan in the forehead. an act of disrespect that Jonathan had never forgotten or forgiven. Jonathan was extremely sensitive about his status as president and couldn't tolerate any challenge to his authority or position within the organization. In the summer of 2014, Jonathan had complained that he had problems with Joel, specifically that he didn't like the way Joel was bad-mouthing him, and that Joel went back east and said some stuff about him about being president. These perceived slights had been festering for months, and the Laconia incident provided the perfect justification for eliminating someone Jonathan viewed as a personal threat to his leadership. The investigation, trials, and ultimate justice. The sophisticated murder of Joel Silver, combined with the brutal assault of Troy Conte and the sexual assault of Michelle, provided federal law enforcement with the evidence they needed to launch one of the most comprehensive and successful organized crime investigations in recent history. The investigation that followed demonstrated how modern law enforcement techniques, when combined with the courage of victims and witnesses, could penetrate even the most secretive criminal organizations and hold their leaders accountable for decades of violence and intimidation. The investigation began with the extraordinary courage of Troy Conte and his wife Michelle, who made the critical and dangerous decision to report their brutal victimization to law enforcement. Despite knowing full well the obvious and potentially lethal danger this cooperation posed to their safety and the safety of their family members. Troy's decision to seek medical treatment for his severe injuries and Michelle's decision to report her sexual assault provided investigators with their first real window into the organization's criminal activities and systematic methods of operation. These initial reports weren't just isolated incidents of violence that could be dismissed as personal disputes or random criminal activity unconnected to organized crime. They revealed a clear pattern of systematic criminal behavior that extended throughout the organization's membership and across multiple states, suggesting the existence of a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than just a motorcycle club that occasionally engaged in illegal activities or individual members who committed crimes independently. The development of confidential informants proved absolutely crucial to the investigation's ultimate success, as these insider witnesses could provide detailed information about the organization's structure, ongoing criminal activities, and specific crimes that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional law enforcement techniques alone. Steve Verhagen, a former prospect who had witnessed many of the organization's crimes and participated in their violent culture, made the courageous decision to cooperate with federal authorities and provide detailed testimony about what he had seen and experienced during his time with the organization. Even more significant was Joseph Hardisty's decision to become a government witness, a choice that required extraordinary courage given his direct involvement in planning Joel Silver's murder and his detailed knowledge of the organization's most serious crimes. Joseph's testimony would prove crucial in establishing the interstate nature of the criminal conspiracy, the involvement of multiple chapter leaders in ordering and coordinating the murder, and the sophisticated methods the organization used to plan and cover up their most serious crimes. The investigation also benefited tremendously from advances in digital forensics and communications analysis that allowed investigators to track the movements and communications of key suspects during critical periods of criminal activity. Cell phone records proved absolutely crucial in establishing the timeline of Joel Silver's murder, the movements of the people involved in planning and carrying out his death, and the coordination between different chapters that made the crime possible. Cell phone data from July 16, 2014, the day after Joel's disappearance, showed that Fresno Charter member Merle Hefferman got in touch with Levi Phipps, the manager of California Crematory, linked to Yost and Webb Funeral Home in Fresno. Merle texted Levi, "You better be there," a communication that would prove to be crucial evidence of the organization's use of legitimate businesses to support their criminal activities and dispose of evidence. After receiving the message, two men arrived at the crematorium, and they brandished a gun at Levi, forcing him to participate in the disposal of Joel's body. They moved what appeared to be a body from their vehicle to the crematory incinerator, and then arranged for another body to be cremated to provide cover for their criminal activities. Cell site data also placed key suspects near the location where Joel's burnt-out truck was discovered on fire in a remote area, creating a digital trail that corroborated witness testimony about the murder and cover-up. On June 22, 2022, after hearing extensive testimony about the organization's structure, criminal activities, and specific violent crimes, a federal jury found Jonathan Nelson, Russell Ott, and Brian Wendt guilty of conspiracy under RICO, as well as conspiracy to commit murder under the violent crimes in aid of racketeering activity and murder under VICAR. In addition to these primary charges, Jonathan Nelson received additional convictions for assault with a dangerous weapon to aid racketeering and use of a firearm during a crime of violence, reflecting his direct participation in the brutal torture of Troy Conte. All three defendants were ultimately sentenced to life in prison, representing the maximum penalty available under federal law and effectively ensuring that they would spend the remainder of their lives in federal custody, unable to direct or participate in any future criminal activities or rebuild the criminal network they had spent decades constructing and maintaining. On May 17, 2023, a second federal jury rendered guilty verdicts against Raymond Folks and Christopher Ranieri, two of the most powerful figures in the broader Hells Angels criminal network, whose convictions demonstrated that the federal investigation had successfully reached beyond the local Sonoma County chapter to target the regional and national leadership of the criminal organization. Raymond Folks faced additional convictions for assault with a dangerous weapon in support of racketeering, relating to his leading role in the systematic torture of Troy Conte, and witness tampering, reflecting his sexual assault of Michelle Conte and his calculated attempts to intimidate her into not cooperating with law enforcement. Christopher Ranieri was found guilty of conspiring to commit murder as per the violent crimes in aid of racketeering activity, establishing his role in authorizing and directing the murder of Joel Silver from his position as Boston chapter president. At the time of this account, both Raymond Folks and Christopher Ranieri were still awaiting their sentences, but the statutory maximum penalties they faced reflected the severity of their convictions. Christopher Ranieri faced a statutory maximum prison term of life, while Raymond Folks faced a statutory maximum prison term of 60 years, sentences that would effectively mean life imprisonment for both men given their ages and the nature of their crimes. Several other organization members chose to cooperate with prosecutors rather than face trial and potential life sentences. Merle Hefferman pleaded guilty for his part in the violent crimes as part of the racketeering conspiracy and was sentenced to 48 months in prison on October 19, 2023. Russell Lyles pleaded guilty to involvement in a racketeering conspiracy and assault and was sentenced to 63 months in federal prison. Damian Cesena pleaded guilty for his part in the violent murder and was sentenced to 52 months in prison.